Hello there, and welcome to All About Earth. Wherever you are tonight, or this morning, I'm glad you've drifted in. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your corner of the world? I love imagining us all connected, even across distances, sharing this little pause together. Now, close your eyes if you'd like, and picture a world that is both familiar and utterly alien. We're traveling back, far, far back, to a moment 41 million years ago. A time scientists call the Cambrian. Imagine the continents are bare, quiet, empty rock. Not a blade of grass, not a bird in the sky, but beneath the surface of the oceans. Ah, that is where the world is alive. Strange creatures drift and dart, unlike anything you've seen. The seas are a living gallery, filled with forms that feel like dreams made flesh, eyes that see in ways ours cannot, limbs that ripple like ribbons, shells gleaming with patterns the earth has since forgotten. The oceans then were not just water. They were theatres of possibility, vast stages where life was rehearsing its first great performances. Everything was new, experimental, a little wild, and though we can't stand on those Cambrian shores, we can still lean close with our imagination and listen to the echoes. How does it feel to picture yourself there, standing on empty land, looking out at seas full of unfamiliar motion? Would you feel wonder, unease, awe? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if this kind of slow journey through deep time speaks to you, tap like, subscribe, and join me again. These little gestures help this curious community grow, like ripples spreading outward in calm water. For now, settle in. Let's dive gently into the Cambrian Aquarium, the first flourishing of life's great story. The Cambrian Period, or 1 million years ago, the curtain lifted on one of the most extraordinary acts in Earth's long drama. For nearly 4 billion years before, our planet had been preparing in silence, building oceans, stirring chemistry, sculpting its landscapes. Life had already existed, of course, but it was modest, microscopic, cautious. For eons, existence unfolded in whispers. Then suddenly, in the span of geological time, no more than the blink of an eye, the whisper became a chorus. This was the Cambrian explosion, the dawn when life discovered complexity and decided to flood the oceans with possibility. If you were to stand on the continents of the Cambrian world, you would find yourself in a place both barren and raw. There were no forests to shade you, no birds to call across the sky, not even the hum of insects. The land was naked, exposed to wind and sunlight. A desert, not of sand, but of bare stone. Silence reigned above the waves. The continents had not yet dressed themselves in green. But step into the oceans, and the story changes entirely. The seas of the Cambrian were vast, deep, and filled with a vitality that seemed to burst forth all at once. Here in these waters, life experimented wildly, producing forms and strategies never before seen on Earth. Evolution, which had taken its time through the preceding ages, suddenly accelerated, as though Earth itself had drawn a deep breath and exhaled creation in a single, extraordinary sigh. This is what scientists call the Cambrian explosion, not a literal blast, but a blossoming. In this interval of about 50 million years, life multiplied its designs, moving from simple patterns to intricate architectures. Organisms grew larger, stranger, and more diverse. Entire blueprints of animal life were drafted in these oceans, blueprints that still echo today in every creature that swims, crawls, or walks across the Earth. The Cambrian was not just a stage for biology, it was a planet in transition. Picture the Earth then. Most of its landmass clustered in southern latitudes, the continents relatively low and flat, edged with shallow seas. The oceans dominated everything, stretching over 2/3 of the globe as they do today, but more expansive in their reach into continental shelves. These shallow marine zones were warm, illuminated, and restless with chemistry, the perfect incubators for experimentation. The atmosphere was different too, though not as alien as in deeper time. Oxygen had begun to accumulate in higher amounts compared to earlier eons, a gift from billions of years of microbial labor. That oxygen was more than just a breath of air. It was fuel, enabling energy-hungry bodies, skeletons, movement and predation. Life could now afford to be ambitious. The Cambrian was in many ways the first age in which living beings could flex their muscles, literally and figuratively. When we call it an explosion, we do not mean a single instant, but a cascade, a rapid flowering across a relatively short slice of time. Imagine Earth as an artist, long preparing brushes, pigments, and canvas. For billions of years, the strokes were faint, films of microbes, mats of algae, quiet experimentations. Then suddenly, the painter's hand quickened, colours leapt across the canvas. Patterns multiplied. What had once been grey became a riot of form. The Cambrian explosion was the moment when many of the fundamental body plans of animals first appeared, broad templates of design that evolution would refine but rarely abandon. It was a period when complexity itself became a survival strategy. Organisms learned to build skeletons for support and defense, to move swiftly through water, to sense and respond to their surroundings in new ways. From the perspective of deep time, it was a creative revolution. Before, life had been simple, cautious, nearly invisible. After, life was visible, dynamic, aggressive, and beautiful. This was the age when ecosystems truly began to take shape. Not just life, but life interacting, competing, and collaborating in vast networks. To understand the Cambrian, one must understand the oceans of that era. They were the great theatres where every drama unfolded. Vast, rolling, layered with light near the surface and darkness in the depths. The shallow seas along continental margins were especially rich. Sunlight reached down to stir photosynthesis. Nutrients washed in from eroding rocks, and life responded with abundance. But unlike the oceans of today, there were no whales, no fish as we know them, no seaweed forests swaying in the currents. Instead, the Cambrian seas belonged to the pioneers, to creatures exploring possibilities never before tested. In these waters, life was busy with invention. The ocean was no longer a quiet soup of microbes. It had become a bustling marketplace of survival strategies. One of the most remarkable features of the Cambrian was its novelty. The land above the water remained barren, but the seas were full of experiments. The contrast was striking. Desolate continents versus oceans bursting with activity. To walk the land was to encounter silence. To dive into the seas was to enter a carnival of movement. This split world created a sense of duality. The continents were waiting, still preparing their soils, still too harsh for plants or animals. But the oceans had already begun their great play, filling the globe with scenes that would shape the course of life forever. The Cambrian was a world of two faces, one still, the other wildly alive. Why did life explode in this period and not before? Scientists continue to debate, and while the answers are complex, the wonder is simple. Something tipped the balance. Perhaps rising oxygen allowed for larger, more energetic bodies. Perhaps the chemistry of the seas provided new nutrients. Perhaps ecological pressures, predators and prey locked in escalating contests, spurred innovation. Whatever the reasons, the outcome was clear. Evolution, which had once seemed hesitant, now ran at full stride. The Cambrian explosion marks one of those rare turning points in Earth's history, when change is not just gradual, but transformative. It was as if the universe whispered, "Now," and life answered with exuberant invention. If we pull back even further, if we imagine ourselves not as scientists but as cosmic travelers, the Cambrian becomes more than a geological period. It becomes a moment of universal significance. Here, on this small blue planet orbiting an average star, the universe found one of its richest expressions of possibility. In the span of 50 million years, life moved from simplicity to a dazzling complexity, laying the foundations for all that would come. Think of it. Without the Cambrian, there would be no vertebrates, no insects, no flowering of diversity that later filled forests and skies. Without the Cambrian, there would be no humans to wonder about it. This was not just Earth's dawn of animals, it was a dawn for imagination itself. The Cambrian was, above all, an age of firsts. First skeletons, first predators, first complex ecosystems where species occupied different roles, interacting in cycles of energy and survival. For the first time, the ocean was not just a place of drifting organisms, but a dynamic community, buzzing with activity and competition. These first did not arrive in silence. They reshaped the planet, Skeletons changed the chemistry of the oceans by locking away minerals. Predation altered the evolutionary game, forcing defenses, armor, and the interactions of these creatures created ripples that would echo through hundreds of millions of years. When you trace the lineage of modern animals, whether a butterfly, a whale, or a human, you find their roots branching back into the Cambrian seas. This was the seedbed of complexity, the first flowering of strategies that would carry life forward into every future chapter. Close your eyes and picture it. The continents bare and ancient, baked under sun and wind, the seas glittering, alive with shapes no human has ever seen in person. The shoreline silent, the waves concealing a universe of motion beneath. It is a paradoxical world, empty above, overflowing below. To walk its coasts would be to feel solitude. To dive into its waters would be to feel wonder and astonishment. This was Earth in the Cambrian, a planet in which life had chosen the ocean as its canvas, painting with furious creativity while leaving the land as a blank page for later. The Cambrian period lasted roughly 56 million years, ending around 45 million years ago. In the measure of Earth's 4.5 billion year history, it is a narrow band, a slender thread in the tapestry, and yet its impact is disproportionate. It is the prologue to animals, the overture to ecosystems, the spark that ignited the fire of biological diversity. The Cambrian reminds us that change need not always be slow. Sometimes in the theatre of evolution, the spotlight flares suddenly, illuminating a scene that changes everything. The Cambrian was one such scene, and its echoes are still with us in every living creature. The Cambrian was more than a time period. It was a revelation. Earth, long silent, suddenly sang. Life, once hidden in microscopic obscurity, rose in brilliance and variety. The seas became crowded, experimental, alive with patterns that still shape the living world. And so we remember the Cambrian not as a distant curiosity, but as a beginning. The dawn when life ceased to whisper and began to shout. When Earth ceased to be a quiet planet and became a thriving one. In this ancient aquarium, 341 million years ago, the story of animals began, and we much later are among its countless chapters. When the curtain of the Cambrian lifted 41 million years ago, the world's geography looked nothing like the neat map posters we tack on classroom walls today. The continents as we know them, Africa, South America, North America, Asia, Australia, Antarctica, were nowhere to be found. Instead, the stage belonged to colossal slabs of stone, drifting slowly across Earth's surface, sometimes colliding, sometimes drifting apart, and occasionally just sitting there like oversized guests at a cosmic dinner table. Chief among these giants was Gondwana, a sprawling rocky colossus that sprawled across the southern hemisphere like an overgrown couch potato of stone. Gondwana was enormous. To put it in perspective, this single landmass gathered together pieces that we now recognize as South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, Australia, and the Arabian Peninsula. Imagine trying to jam half of today's world map into one solid block of land that was Gondwana. At its peak, it stretched from near the equator all the way down to the southern polar regions, a tectonic plate that dominated the Cambrian Earth. Gondwana was not delicate or dainty. It was the heavyweight champion of the planet's lithosphere, a continent so large that its gravitational pull alone may have subtly affected ocean circulation and Earth's rotation. But Gondwana was not alone. For every colossus there are companions, smaller, scrappier landmasses that played their own roles in the planetary dance. Scattered across the globe were Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia, each a continent in waiting, destined one day to fuse, fracture, and drift into the patchwork of modern geography. Compared to Gondwana, they were minnows beside a whale, yet they were hardly insignificant. Laurentia, for example, would one day become the heart of North America. Baltica, smaller still, would evolve into parts of northern Europe. Siberia, remote, solitary, and awkwardly adrift, was already practicing for its future role as the frozen expanse of Eurasia's northern crown. If Gondwana was the lumbering giant of the Cambrian Earth, then Laurentia was its brash little cousin. Compact, buoyant, and perched closer to the equator, Laurentia sat surrounded by warm, shallow seas. its margins flooding and retreating as the ocean levels shifted. Baltica, meanwhile, was an independent loner, small, detached, floating in the northern hemisphere like a forgotten island in a vast geologic sea. And Siberia. Siberia was the drifter. Isolated, enigmatic, it wandered across latitudes as if it had misplaced its geological passport. Together, these landmasses created a world that felt strangely lopsided, a giant southern dominator and a scattering of northern satellites. Yet even these fragments were dwarfed by something larger still, the Panthalassic Ocean. If Gondwana was the giant of stone, Panthalassa was the giant of water. Covering the vast majority of Earth's surface, Panthalassa was less an ocean and more an entire planetary personality. It stretched from horizon to horizon, swallowing the majority of the globe in blue. Imagine Earth as a water balloon with one oversized patch of rocky crust glued onto it. That was the Cambrian planet. Panthalassa was so dominant that any traveller of the time, imaginary though they would be, would have seen far more sea than land, a planet that looked more like Neptune than our present Earth. If today's Earth is called the blue planet, Cambrian Earth was the super blue planet. Picture it for a moment. Stand atop Gondwana's rocky cliffs, bare, lifeless, unsoftened by forests or fields, and gaze outward. What do you see? Nothing but ocean, endless, restless ocean. No continents on the near horizon, no cozy islands speckling the seas, just waves, winds, and the great blue sweep of Panthalassa, a planetary swimming pool so large that Gondwana itself seemed like little more than a raft drifting across it. But here is the twist. None of these continents or oceans were permanent. They were participants in Earth's favorite pastime, plate tectonics. The continents were not fixed, not immovable bastions of permanence, but restless passengers on slow-moving plates of lithosphere. They slid across the mantle like bumper cars in extreme slow motion, colliding, separating, and rearranging themselves on timescales so vast that entire mountain ranges could rise and crumble before one dance step was complete. In the Cambrian, this dance was still in its early choreography. Gondwana was consolidating, pulling together fragments of earlier supercontinents into one grand southern expanse. Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia were like dancers who had wandered out of formation, swirling separately in the northern hemisphere. And between them all, Panthalassa stretched as the vast dance floor, a liquid stage upon which continents drifted with imperceptible grace. It is tempting to imagine Gondwana as a single, unified block of stone, but in truth it was more like a crowded neighborhood of geological provinces that had stitched themselves together over millions of years. Cratons, those ancient, stable cores of continental crust, had fused, locking hands like partners in a cosmic square dance. Around them, younger orogenic belts and mobile belts formed the seams, reminders of earlier collisions and mountain-building episodes. Though Gondwana appeared solid, it was built upon a history of collisions, sutures, and compromises, a geological quilt rather than a monolith. Meanwhile, the smaller continents were not idle. Laurentia in particular seemed to enjoy its independence, spinning slowly in the northern tropics. Imagine a sun-drenched proto-North America drifting lazily across the equatorial seas, its edges rimmed by shallow marine shelves. Baltica, on the other hand, had drifted into higher latitudes, its lonely craton slowly rotating and wandering northward. Siberia, quirky as always, floated in isolation, unattached to any larger assembly, as though it preferred to sit in the cosmic cafeteria by itself. The great question, of course, is what held all of this together. The answer lies beneath convection currents in Earth's mantle. Deep within the planet, heat moved sluggishly, creating currents that dragged the lithospheric plates along. Gondwana did not choose to sit at the bottom of the planet any more than Siberia chose to wander alone. They were passengers on an unstoppable system, a planetary conveyor belt powered by the Earth's internal furnace. This is what makes geology so grandly humbling. The continents we casually walk across are not fixtures, but rafts on molten seas, drifting on forces far beyond our control. Now let us pause for a moment and laugh at the absurdity of it. Imagine trying to walk from Laurentia to Gondwana in the Cambrian. You would set out confidently only to find yourself staring at thousands of kilometers of ocean. No bridges, no causeways, no shortcuts, just water, waves, and more water. The continents were not neighbors then, they were solitary islands in an oversized planetary soup. Humanity, of course, did not exist yet, but had some unfortunate time traveler appeared, they would have been forced to admit that Earth was not a very walkable planet. Unless you enjoyed swimming a few thousand kilometers through Panthalassa, you were out of luck. Even so, these slow continental drifts were already shaping Earth's destiny. Gondwana's sheer size influenced tides and currents. Its southern sprawl cast long shadows on ocean circulation, driving nutrient cycles and patterns that would echo through ecosystems to come. Laurentia's position near the equator created shallow tropical seas that would one day preserve some of the richest fossil deposits of the Cambrian, places where soft-bodied creatures left imprints like whispers in stone. Baltica's slow journey northward set the stage for later collisions with Laurentia, sparking future mountain chains. Siberia's isolation ensured that it would remain a distinctive piece of the puzzle, fated to collide with Asia much later to form one of the most massive landmasses in history. All of this was part of the grand tectonic ballet, continents colliding, separating, reassembling, each step invisible to the naked eye, but undeniable across millions of years. From above, Earth must have looked like a vast blue marble, with a handful of rocky freckles, most of them clustered into the Gondwanan south. It was a planet dominated not by land, but by water, with continents playing supporting roles in the drama of planetary motion. Geologists today reconstruct this world from fragments. Magnetic signatures locked in rocks, isotopic clues whispering of ancient positions, mountain belts that mark where continents once collided. Through these traces, the outline of Gondwana emerges, alongside its companions Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia. Together they paint a picture of a world at once alien and familiar. The continents drifted then as they do now. Panthalassa covered most of the planet then, just as the Pacific dominates today. The difference is scale, arrangement, and the sheer sense of a planet, still experimenting with its geography. If one lesson emerges from the Cambrian Earth, it is that geography is never permanent. Gondwana would not last forever. It would eventually fragment, its pieces scattering across the globe to form the continents we know today. Laurentia would collide with Baltica, crumpling into mountain ranges. Siberia would eventually join Eurasia. Panthalassa itself would vanish, consumed by tectonic subduction, leaving only its echoes in modern ocean basins. Nothing on Earth stands still, not mountains, not oceans, not even continents the size of Gondwana. But in the Cambrian, all of this lay far in the future. For now Gondwana sprawled like a southern monarch, while Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia spun in their lonely orbits, and Panthalassa washed endlessly around them all. The continents drifted in silence, too slow for any eye to see, yet powerful enough to reshape the very face of the planet. Theirs was a dance that knew no audience, except perhaps us peering back 500 million years later, trying to imagine a world ruled by stone and sea. So let us leave this vision here. Gondwana, the colossus of the south, reclining across the globe, Laurentia, small but lively, sunning itself in the equatorial waters, Baltica, lonely and wandering toward northern horizons, Siberia, enigmatic and aloof, drifting in solitude, and Panthalassa, the endless ocean, swallowing the earth in blue. Together they form a picture at once alien and profoundly humbling, a reminder that continents are not eternal, oceans are not fixed, and our planet is a restless wanderer, reshaping itself again and again in the great geologic waltz of time. The Cambrian Earth was not a gentle place. If you were somehow able to step back in time, leaving behind the comfort of 21st century air conditioning and ozone protection, you would not find yourself strolling under a pleasant sky or enjoying a light spring breeze. Instead, you would have walked straight into what could only be described as a planetary sauna, a world where the thermostat had been turned up to tropical settings and then left running for millions of years without pause. The average temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius, already warm by modern standards, but remember, this was the global average. That meant the poles were far from icy, and the equatorial regions could feel like someone had cranked the humidity dial up to steam room. It was a climate that did not care about your comfort. It was dramatic, sweaty, and a little bit suffocating. Why so steamy? The answer? as always, comes from the air itself. The Cambrian atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide, not just a little thick, but positively stuffed. Where our modern sky contains a few hundred parts per million of carbon dioxide, the Cambrian sky carried levels many times higher. Carbon dioxide acted as an efficient greenhouse blanket, trapping heat that poured in from the sun and refusing to let it escape. If today's climate scientists lose sleep over rising carbon levels, they would have wept openly at the numbers in the Cambrian. But there was no one around to complain. No scientists, no governments, no polite conversations about carbon footprints. Only the atmosphere itself, cooking the planet gently but insistently. A planetary spa session lasting tens of millions of years. The air was not only carbon heavy, but oxygen poor. Today we breathe air that is about 21% oxygen, enough to keep our lungs satisfied and our brains working without too much strain. The Cambrian Earth offered less generosity. Oxygen levels are estimated to have hovered between 10 and 15%. To modern humans, that is the equivalent of living on the summit of a very tall mountain. If you tried to sprint across Cambrian landscapes with your current physiology, you would be gasping for air within moments, dizzy from the thinness of oxygen. Fire itself would have struggled. Flames thrive on oxygen, and with so little of it, lightning strikes may have ignited fewer blazes. Sparks would have smouldered rather than roared, and the dramatic infernos we associate with forests and brushlands would have been nearly impossible. Not that it mattered much, since forests had not yet appeared. This strange cocktail of low oxygen and high carbon dioxide gave the Cambrian air a quality that is hard to imagine today. To breathe it would have been to take in a mix that felt heavy, dense, and faintly suffocating. Perhaps your lungs would have felt as though they were working overtime, pulling and pulling but never quite filling. This was the sky of the Cambrian, an atmosphere that both sustained life and held it back. A sky that granted energy but limited ambition. It was not hostile exactly, but it was demanding, requiring every creature to adapt in order to thrive. And then there was the rain. For those who lingered near the seas, the Cambrian offered deluges, downpours that soaked the margins of the continents, thunderstorms that rolled in with little warning, sheets of water that fell as though the sky itself were perpetually wringing out a wet towel. Humidity clung to every surface near the ocean, mist rose in the mornings, and the world smelled perpetually of wet stone. If you enjoy the feeling of stepping outside during a heavy summer storm, the Cambrian coastlines would have offered that sensation on repeat, day after day, year after year, for millions of years. But wander farther inland and the story changed entirely. The Cambrian continents were bare and rocky, with no plants to hold water and no soil to sponge it up. Once you moved away from the margins, you entered expanses of aridity, dry lands that stretched under harsh sunlight, deserts where rain almost never reached. Without vegetation, there were no roots to trap moisture, no forest to cool down storms. The interior was parched, a land of stark extremes. Imagine trudging from a coastline drenched in monsoon-like rains, only to arrive in a desert so dry it cracked the earth, all within a few hundred kilometers. The Cambrian earth specialized in contradiction, soggy edges and bone-dry centers, humidity and drought coexisting on the same landmass. This oscillation between wet and dry was not merely inconvenient, it was dramatic. Floods would have swept coastal plains, washing nutrients and minerals into shallow basins. Inland, winds would have whipped across deserts, carrying dust and grit without mercy. Lightning would have flashed across the skies, but fires would rarely take hold, leaving the landscapes not charred, but simply barren. Without trees or grass to anchor the land, erosion was unchecked. Rain tore gullies into naked rock, and winds sculpted exposed stone into raw, alien forms. The Cambrian climate was as much an artist as it was a tormentor, carving, washing, and sculpting with no resistance from roots or leaves. Temperature, meanwhile, was stubbornly warm. Unlike our present Earth, where climate zones vary widely from the equator to the poles, the Cambrian world was much more evenly heated. With so much carbon dioxide clogging the sky, heat spread more efficiently across latitudes. This meant that polar regions, those areas that today are cloaked in ice, were more like mild vacation resorts. There were no glaciers, no great ice caps, no frozen wastelands. Instead, the entire planet basked in a kind of unrelenting warmth. To modern eyes, it would have been disorienting. Imagine traveling north expecting to find snow, and instead finding balmy breezes. The Cambrian Earth had essentially banished winter, leaving only different flavors of warmth. Humidity near the seas also meant fogs and mists were common. Early mornings may have seen thick blankets of vapor rolling across rocky coastlines, shrouding the world in mystery. Afternoons would have burned off some of that haze, leaving skies heavy with heat, and evenings would have brought it all back again. The daily rhythm was not one of comfort, but of extremes. Steam, storm, dryness, and then back to steam. In such a world, even the weather forecast would have been little more than a resigned shrug. Hot, wet, unpredictable, repeat. To call the Cambrian climate uncomfortable for humans is an understatement. Our species did not exist yet, but if it had, survival would have been a constant negotiation with suffocation, sweat, and thirst. You could not simply pack a picnic and stroll out into Cambrian landscapes. You would be drenched within minutes near the ocean, parched within hours inland, and dizzy from low oxygen the whole time. It was not a climate built for leisure. It was a climate that tested the limits of endurance. Yet there was a certain grandeur in it. The skies, heavy with carbon dioxide, may have tinted the light differently, casting strange hues across the horizon. Storms rolling off the oceans would have been colossal, fueled by warm air and moisture. Thunder would have cracked across bare stone landscapes with a resonance that modern forests and cities mute. Lightning, unimpeded by skyscrapers or treetops, would have danced freely across horizons. The Cambrian climate was not gentle, but it was theatrical. It was a sky that liked to put on a show. There is also humor in imagining it. Earth during the Cambrian was like a planet that had decided to turn into a sauna for a few dozen million years. The air thick with steam, the oxygen so low you could barely jog across a field, the rain pouring down in relentless sheets near the coasts, and the interiors cracking under the sun. It was as if the planet could not make up its mind. Should it drench you or dry you out? Should it suffocate you with humidity or with drought? Either way, you were going to sweat. The Cambrian climate had no interest in human notions of comfort. It was a cosmic prank, a sauna with no exit door. But beneath the humor lies the truth of planetary science. The Cambrian climate was the product of forces that had been building for eons. High carbon dioxide levels were not an accident. They were the result of volcanoes pumping gases into the sky, of tectonic cycles recycling carbon into the atmosphere. Low oxygen was not neglect. It was a reflection of biological processes, still learning to balance the chemistry of air. Rainfall patterns arose not from malice but from simple physics. Warm air holds more moisture, and where it meets cooler systems, that moisture falls. Deserts inland were the inevitable result of bare rock landscapes and the absence of vegetation to mediate the cycle. The Cambrian Earth was not hostile for the sake of hostility. It was simply young, unrefined, still working out the balance that much later would allow forests to grow, animals to breathe easily, and climates to stabilize into something closer to our present world. To look back on the Cambrian climate is to realize how precarious Earth's balance has always been. The comfortable conditions we enjoy today are the product of billions of years of atmospheric tinkering, not a permanent gift. In the Cambrian, Earth leaned heavily toward extremes, hot, wet, and strange. It was a world both hostile and awe-inspiring, a reminder that the planet is not designed for our convenience. The Cambrian Earth was an untamed experiment, a climatic roller coaster that ran on rules of physics and chemistry, indifferent to comfort but spectacular in scale. So if you imagine yourself standing there somewhere on Cambrian Gondwana or Laurentia, the experience would be unforgettable. The air heavy and thin at the same time, the heat pressing in from every side, the rain pelting down one moment and vanishing the next, the desert wind scouring your skin if you wandered too far inland. You might laugh at the absurdity of it, sweating and gasping while staring at a horizon that offered no relief. And perhaps just before you fainted from oxygen deprivation, you would admit the truth. The Cambrian climate was not made for you. It was made for itself. Hot, wet, and strange. That was the Cambrian world. A planetary sauna, a cosmic storm machine, a desert wrapped inside a rainstorm. It was Earth in one of its more dramatic moods. And though it may not have been welcoming, it was magnificent. If the continents of the Cambrian were lonely stones drifting across the globe, then the ocean was everything else. It was not simply water, it was the very identity of the planet. In the Cambrian, Earth was overwhelmingly blue, draped in Panthalassa, the all-sea, a super-ocean so vast it made continents look like crumbs floating on soup. To call it an ocean almost undersells it. Panthalassa was the Earth itself in liquid form, wide, restless, and infinite. From horizon to horizon, it ruled the Cambrian world, a colossal bath warmed by ancient sunlight and stirred by planetary forces. Step back in imagination. Close your eyes and try to picture it. Earth, 500 million years ago, spinning under a young sun, its face wrapped almost entirely in shimmering waves. The blue was brighter, less interrupted by land masses. From space, you would have seen Gondwana like a crooked slab in the south, Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia scattered above. But everything else was water, an endless rolling canvas, glinting with light and trembling with waves, moving to rhythms no human ear would ever hear. And this ocean was warm, not lukewarm, not chilly, but warm in the way a bath feels when you first slip in. Average surface temperatures may have been 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, making Panthalassa more like a planetary spa than a storm-tossed modern ocean. Imagine floating in its shallows, the water silky, heated by the greenhouse air above, lapping gently at stony coasts. If modern oceans hold icy poles and temperate zones, the Cambrian Ocean was less divided, its warmth spilling across nearly every latitude. The seas were like a warm blanket wrapped around the globe, inviting and a little bit suffocating, as though Earth had decided to host the longest pool party in history. Beneath those waves, something remarkable was happening. For the first time in Earth's story, reefs began to rise. Not the massive flamboyant coral cities of today, but humble, early beginnings. Patches of reef-building communities that created hard, stony frameworks. They were small, scattered, fragile things, but they were revolutionary. They offered structure in an otherwise soft world, stone amid slime. These early reefs shimmered like jewels in the shallows, glittering with calcium carbonate, catching the light in ways that must have dazzled any eye capable of seeing. They were the first whispers of the architecture that oceans would later perfect. Habitats, fortresses, and cathedrals built life itself. And then there were the currents. The Cambrian Ocean was not still. It pulsed with circulation, strong currents rushing across basins, tides rising and falling with the pull of a moon still closer to Earth than it is today. Imagine standing on a Cambrian shoreline. Waves would slam and pull, and tides would climb higher, pulled by a moon larger in the sky than any of us have ever seen. The ocean was alive in motion as much as in biology. Great conveyor belts of water carried warmth, nutrients, and sediments from one edge of Panthalassa to another. These currents were invisible rivers, moving vast volumes with steady determination. To swim in them would have been to feel the power of a force much greater than yourself, a planetary heartbeat made of water. But more than temperature, reefs or currents, the Cambrian Ocean was the center of everything. It was the stage, the factory, the womb. If you wanted to find life on Earth 500 million years ago, you had no choice but to look here. The land was barren, a desert of stone. The skies were thin of oxygen, empty of birds, bees, or trees. But the ocean was a carnival. It was crowded, noisy, experimental. It was where Earth poured its energy, where chemistry found choreography, and where existence itself became ambition. Panthalassa was not just water, it was imagination. It was invention. It was the very definition of Earth's vitality. Picture drifting above one of those embryonic reefs. Light shafts cut through the water, dancing across stone. Tiny filaments and mats clung to the framework, anchoring themselves against the pull of the tide. Sediment stirred as waves rolled overhead, and currents whipped particles into spirals. Everything shimmered, swayed, and pulsed. It was not yet the kaleidoscope of modern coral reefs, but it was a beginning. The first attempt at building neighborhoods under the sea. Life had begun to realize that stone was useful not just for defense, but for community. And still the ocean stretched on, mostly empty to the human eye. Imagine standing on a Cambrian coast and staring across it. There were no islands in view, no continents rising dramatically from the water, just horizon, endless and uninterrupted, broken only by waves and clouds. If you had taken a boat, though no boat yet existed, you could have sailed for weeks, months, perhaps years without ever striking land. The ocean was not a gap between continents. The continents were the interruptions in an otherwise seamless ocean. Panthalassa was the true body of Earth, and the continents were merely freckles on its skin. The humour of it is easy to see. Earth in the Cambrian was basically a hot tub that got out of hand. Warm water everywhere, no lifeguards, and no shallow end signs. The reefs were just beginning to sprout like awkward first attempts at underwater decoration, and the currents roared as if some cosmic pump had been left running on full blast. If you were foolish enough to dive too deep, there was no scuba tank, no rescue mission, just darkness and pressure waiting to crush you like a soda can. Yet, for all its hazards, Panthalassa was irresistible. It was the place to be, the cosmic aquarium, where Earth's real action unfolded. Currents in the Cambrian Ocean likely shaped everything about life's early strategies. They transported nutrients from continental shelves out to deeper waters, and they returned sediments back again. They sculpted coastlines and stirred up mud. They carved paths, invisible to the eye, but essential for the flow of energy. To live in Panthalassa was to be carried, whether you wanted to or not, to drift, to resist, to adapt. These flows were both gift and challenge, scattering life across basins while also concentrating it in certain sweet spots. Imagine invisible highways stretching beneath the waves, directing traffic no one could see but everyone had to obey. And there was sound too, or at least vibrations. With tides stronger than today, with waves slamming coasts bare of vegetation, the Cambrian Ocean must have roared. Waves would have echoed against rocky cliffs, booming without the dampening of trees or soil. Storms would have lashed the water with a violence magnified by warm air above and energy stored in the sea below. To stand anywhere near Panthalassa was to live inside a soundtrack of crashes, sloshes and thunder, a music composed entirely of water and wind. Yet amid that drama, there was tranquility. In the shallows where reefs clung, light flickered softly through the waves. In lagoons, the water stilled to a shimmer. Along tidal flats, ripples etched delicate patterns into sand. The Cambrian Ocean contained both chaos and calm, ferocity and gentleness. It was as moody as it was magnificent. To describe Panthalassa is, in a way, to describe Earth itself in the Cambrian. It was not just an ocean, it was identity, character, mood. It shaped the air, sculpted the land, and dictated the possibilities of life. Warm, restless, and vast, it was Earth's defining feature. In many ways, the continents were still only guests. The ocean was the host, the master of ceremonies, the endless expanse upon which all else depended. And for all its drama, it had a strange beauty. Imagine sunlight scattered across endless swells, moonlight painting silver across the waves of a closer, larger moon. Imagine reefs shimmering underwater like tiny galaxies of stone, forming in silence. Imagine the rhythm of tides, rising higher and falling farther than those we know, as if the very ocean breathed with deeper lungs. The Cambrian Ocean was not just alive, it was theatrical, a performance staged every day across the surface of the Earth. It is tempting to laugh too. A cosmic aquarium, warm as a bath, with reefs still practicing their architecture and currents pulling everything around like a cosmic water slide. Earth during the Cambrian was like a theme park designed by an absent-minded god who loved water but forgot to add land. Here, the planet seemed to say, have an ocean, actually. Have one ocean, and only one. Don't worry about continents, they're just for decoration. And yet, in that humour lies wonder, because it worked. That single vast ocean became the crucible for everything that followed. The reefs that began in the Cambrian would one day become sprawling coral systems, shaping ecosystems across the globe. The currents that churned Panthalassa would drive the spread of species and the cycling of elements. The warmth of those waters would provide stability for experimentation. It was messy, it was extreme, but it was fertile. So we leave the Cambrian Ocean as both joke and epic. Joke, because it was absurdly dominant, a bathtub planet with a few scraps of rock poking through. Epic, because it was the true beginning of Earth as we know it. For in those warm, rolling waves, Earth declared its allegiance, not to rock or sky, but to water. Panthalassa was not background scenery. It was the stage, the actor, and the script all at once. And when you think of it that way, the Cambrian Ocean was less a place and more a presence. The heartbeat of the planet, the whisper of life's beginnings, the warm, strange cradle that held the future in its currents. If you stood on the shore of Gondwana and looked out at Panthalassa, you would have been staring not just at water but at destiny. An endless sea, shimmering in light, humming with motion, waiting for life to take its next great leap. That was the Cambrian Ocean, warm, wet, loud, restless, dazzling. The center of life, the heart of Earth, the great aquarium of time. And if you are imagining it now, waves crashing, reefs glittering, currents tugging, then you too are peering into the water where our story first swam. If the Cambrian Period were a science fiction film, it would not be the sleek, polished kind where everyone speaks calmly on a spaceship. No, it would be the wild, experimental kind where the special effects team has gone absolutely out of control. Evolution, after billions of years of testing simple forms, suddenly had a burst of inspiration and decided to throw everything at the wall to see what stuck. Eyes here, extra limbs there, shells, spikes, flaps, soft bodies, rigid armor. Why not? The result was a cast of characters so strange that even Hollywood's most eccentric creature designers might shake their heads and mutter, "That's too weird, tone it down." But this was the Cambrian. Toning it down was not in fashion. Let us begin with the celebrities of the Cambrian seas. The trilobites. If there had been paparazzi 500 million years ago, trilobites would have been everywhere. On every rock, in every shallow basin, filling every snapshot, these creatures were the great survivors of their age. Tiny armored crawlers that scuttled across the seafloor like an army of little robots. Picture a pill bug, those roly-polies that curl into balls when touched, except made entirely of segmented armor plates, with ridges, spines and eyes mounted high like little periscopes. Trilobites came in dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of varieties. Some were the size of coins, others as large as dinner plates. They rolled, they dug, they grazed, they swam a little when necessary, but mostly they marched across the seabed with relentless determination. Trilobites were not flashy, but they were everywhere. Imagine walking across a Cambrian beach and looking down. The sand would have been alive with their tracks. To modern eyes, they might look like armored beetles without wings or miniature tanks rolling forward on stubby legs. And indeed, they were the tanks of their time, heavily armored and adaptable. They could burrow into sediment, nibble on detritus, or, if feeling ambitious, go scavenging for something more substantial. Their bodies were marvels of modular design, segmented, jointed, flexible yet protected. But where there are grazers and scuttlers, there are predators. And in the Cambrian, no predator loomed larger, stranger, or more terrifying than Anomalocaris. The name means abnormal shrimp, which is both hilarious and misleading. Anomalocaris was not a shrimp, not even close. Imagine instead a creature as long as a grown human, with a body built like a segmented torpedo, flaps along its sides for swimming, and at its head a pair of wicked, grasping appendages, shaped like giant shrimp claws. These claws could snap forward, seize prey, and funnel it straight toward a circular mouth lined with jagged plates. Think of a pineapple slicer turned into a mouth, spinning and crunching anything unlucky enough to be caught. If trilobites were the little armored cars of the Cambrian, Anomalocaris was the monster truck that flipped them over. To early paleontologists, Anomalocaris was such a strange jigsaw puzzle that they mistook its parts for entirely different animals. One fossilized claw was thought to be a shrimp, its mouth a jellyfish, its body something else altogether. Only later did scientists realize all these mismatched pieces belonged to the same nightmare predator. Anomalocaris was the star villain of the Cambrian seas, cruising gracefully through the water with undulating flaps, eyes mounted like twin towers, and claws that could snatch trilobites off the seabed. Picture the shark from Jaws reimagined as a segmented bug with grabby arms and a blender for a mouth. Spielberg would have been proud, but not all Cambrian creatures were terrifying. Some were just bizarre. Enter Opabinia, the five-eyed wonder. Yes, 5 eyes, perched on stalks across its head like a row of alien searchlights. And as if that weren't enough, it had a long, flexible proboscis ending in a claw, which it used like a vacuum hose to snatch up prey and deliver it to its mouth, tucked underneath its head. Imagine a vacuum cleaner with googly eyes. 5 of them, and you have something close to Orpibinia. When scientists first reconstructed it, they laughed out loud. Literally, at a famous paleontological meeting, the drawing of Orpibinia caused the audience to burst into chuckles, not because it was wrong, but because it looked absurdly right. So weird that humor was the only response. And yet, in its time, Orpibinia was perfectly suited, swimming gently, poking around the sediment with its proboscis, scooping up bits of food while its 5 eyes scanned for trouble. Alien to us, but utterly at home in the Cambrian. And then there were the quiet ones, the soft-bodied drifters that seemed unthreatening, but were just as important. Sponges, for instance, were already here, some of the earliest architects of the ocean. They anchored themselves, filtering water and pulling out nutrients, simple but stubborn, quietly shaping ecosystems without anyone noticing. Sponges are the sort of creatures that, if they could talk, would say, "We've been here since the beginning, we'll be here at the end, and we're fine with being overlooked." They lacked drama, but they were survivors, some lineages continuing straight through to today's seas. Jellyfish, too, were present in the Cambrian, drifting like living umbrellas across the water. Without bones or shells, they left few fossils, but we know they pulsed and floated in those ancient seas, trailing tentacles, stinging anything small enough to blunder close. Imagine translucent lanterns glowing softly in the water, moving with the tides, delicate but deadly. They were the ghosts of the Cambrian, ephemeral yet dangerous, floating reminders that sometimes elegance can sting. Together, these creatures created a caste unlike any other. The trilobites were the crowds, endless, marching, industrious. Anomalocaris was the villain, slicing and hunting with ruthless efficiency. Orpibinia was the oddball comic relief, absurd but effective. Sponges were the quiet engineers, unassuming but essential. Jellyfish were the ethereal dancers, drifting through the stage with silent menace. If you imagine the Cambrian as a theatre production, this was the ensemble, a bizarre experimental performance where every role was exaggerated and no design was too strange to try. And oh, the variety. Trilobites alone came in countless shapes: flat, spiny, smooth, ridged. Some had elaborate spines that stuck out like defensive fences. Others had sleek carapaces built for burrowing. Anomalocaris may have been the largest, but it too had relatives, other anomalocaridids with variations on the same terrifying theme. Orpibinia was unique, but its strangeness was only one among dozens of other soft-bodied oddities, many of which still defy classification. The Cambrian explosion was not about perfection, it was about possibility. Evolution was trying every idea at once, keeping the ones that worked, discarding the rest. The result was a bestiary so wild that looking at a fossil slab from the Burgess Shale feels like flipping through an alien biology textbook. There is humor in it all, of course. Trilobites scuttling like tiny Roombas, endlessly vacuuming the seafloor. Anomalocaris snapping up prey like a child with grabby tongs at a buffet. Orpibinia waving its proboscis like a party streamer, while its 5 eyes kept watch in every direction, sponges sitting there like furniture, and jellyfish drifting by like balloons that might zap you if you got too close. Cambrian was not just strange, it was delightfully strange, as if evolution were giggling to itself while sketching out new blueprints. And yet, beneath the humor, there was grandeur. For in these creatures we see the roots of so much to come. Trilobites set the stage for arthropods, a lineage that would eventually give us insects, crabs, spiders, and the buzzing, crawling, clicking world around us today. Anomalacus and its kin experimented with large predation, paving the way for future apex hunters. Orpibinia showed that evolution could be playful, that even absurd designs might succeed for millions of years. Sponges and jellyfish proved that simplicity could endure, that even the quietest creatures could shape ecosystems. The Cambrian creatures were not just oddities, they were pioneers. They tested the limits of body plans, invented strategies, and filled ecological roles that had never existed before. Some would vanish, their lineages cut off, their strangeness preserved only in stone. Others would echo forward, transformed, diversified, reimagined across eons. Without them, the latest story of life, dinosaurs, mammals, humans, would never have unfolded. So when you picture the Cambrian, picture not just strangeness, but energy. Picture trilobites crawling in their thousands, their little legs tapping like typewriters across the sand. Picture an Anomalocaris gliding with menace, its claws snapping, its circular mouth chewing through armor. Picture Opibinia swiveling its 5 eyes and delicately plucking food with its hose-like proboscis. Picture sponges filtering endlessly, patient and persistent. Picture jellyfish drifting in silent grace, their tentacles glowing faintly in the light. This was Earth's first great parade of animals. Awkward, brilliant, bizarre, and perhaps smile at the absurdity of it all. Because if you were dropped into the Cambrian seas, you might laugh before you screamed. You would be surrounded by creatures that seemed drawn from cartoons or fever dreams, yet they were real, thriving, and utterly serious about survival. Evolution does not care whether its designs look ridiculous. It cares only that they work, and in the Cambrian, they worked spectacularly, turning Earth into a carnival of monsters that were as wonderful as they were strange. That was the Cambrian cast of creatures: trilobites, the tireless marchers; Anomalocaris, the fearsome predator; Opabinia, the 5-eyed oddball; sponges, the quiet builders; jellyfish, the drifting phantoms. Together they created a world both alien and familiar, a reminder that life's first great experiment was not just about survival, it was about imagination. And so we end this vision of the Cambrian, not with fear but with wonder, because in those strange sea monsters we see both the alien and the ancestral. They are the echoes of our deep past, the proof that life is bold enough to try anything, and the evidence that even the weirdest experiments can leave a legacy. 500 million years ago, the seas crawled, swam, and shimmered with these bizarre pioneers. They were strange, they were funny, they were terrifying, and they were beautiful. And without them, there would be no Earth. If you had been transported back to the Cambrian period, the first thing you would have noticed about Earth's continents is how astonishingly empty they were. Not just quiet, not just sparsely populated, but empty in a way that feels almost eerie. Today, when we think of land, we picture a riot of greenery, trees stretching skyward, grasses rolling like carpets, mosses softening stone, flowers splashing colour across valleys. But in the Cambrian, none of that existed. The continents were naked stone, weathered by time, stripped by wind, washed by rain, but utterly devoid of plants or animals. They were deserts, not of sand, but of bare bedrock. Landscapes that looked less like Earth as we know it, and more like a dry, ancient version of Mars. Imagine walking across one of these Cambrian continents. Beneath your feet, rock, gravel, dust. Not soil in the sense we understand it, because soil is alive, teeming with roots and worms and bacteria. In the Cambrian, there were no roots, no worms, no vegetation at all, to break down the stone into rich, fertile earth. Instead, there was only raw mineral surface, scraped and cracked by weather. Your boots, or rather the imaginary boots you'd wish you had, would crunch over surfaces, sharp and unsoftened. Hills would rise bare, their flanks carved only by erosion. Valleys would stretch barren, their floors littered with fragments of stone. Rivers may have trickled in places, but without forests to shade them or grasses to bind their banks. They would have been muddy, braided, and unstable. It would not have been a landscape that invited you to linger. And yet, these continents were not entirely sterile. They carried life of a sort, but life at its simplest and most modest. On some rocks, especially near water, you might have seen dark, slippery coatings, thin films of cyanobacteria or mats of algae, forming what scientists call microbial biofilms. These mats spread like living paint across stone, slimy to the touch, greenish or brownish in hue, quietly converting sunlight into energy. They were the true pioneers of land, though their dominion was fragile. Step across them, and they would tear, scrape the surface, and they would be gone. Yet despite their fragility, they were there, forming the first tenuous bridge between sea and land. It is almost funny to picture it. Continents vast and grand, but their only residents are slimy films clinging to damp cracks. No forests, no jungles, no savannas, just microbial carpeting. If you were expecting the lush vibrancy of a national park, you would be bitterly disappointed. This was the bare-bones version of land, a stripped-down prototype Earth still waiting for its gardener. Without vegetation, the continents were at the mercy of wind. And oh, what winds they must have been! With no trees to break their force, no grasses to slow them, the wind swept freely across the rocky surfaces. Dust storms would have risen suddenly, carrying grit for miles, sandblasting cliffs, scouring valleys. The land would have sung with the constant whistle of air tearing across open ground. To stand there would have been to face a storm that never ended, a restless atmosphere forever at play, with exposed stone. Picture it like this. The Cambrian continents were nature's version of an empty parking lot, huge, flat, exposed, and always windy. Rain, too, had a dramatic impact. With no roots to hold the ground, rain fell on bare rock and ran off quickly, carving gullies and channels, washing sediment down slopes, cutting strange shapes into cliffs. Erosion was unchecked. Water tore at the land like an impatient sculptor, reshaping it with every storm. Where rivers flowed, they wandered chaotically, splitting and merging, unable to settle into stable channels. Where rain fell, it hammered stone without mercy. Over millions of years, landscapes formed not from the balance between growth and erosion, but from erosion alone. The continents of the Cambrian were sculptures carved by water and wind, landscapes where every curve and canyon was the product of loss, rather than addition. In such a world, the very idea of land would have felt alien to us. We are used to land as something living, something soft beneath our feet, something clothed in colour and sound. The Cambrian continents offered none of this. No rustle of leaves, no birdsong, no insect hum, only the whisper of wind, the crash of rain, and the crunch of stone. To modern senses, the silence would have been overwhelming. Imagine camping there, though. Heaven help you if you try. Your tent would flap violently in the wind. Your lungs would gasp for oxygen. Your canteen would dry quickly under the sun, and your view would consist of endless rock. Within hours, you would be longing for even the buzz of a mosquito, just for company. But while the land felt empty, it was not irrelevant. These continents were slowly, steadily preparing the way for what would come. The erosion they suffered carried nutrients down into rivers and shallow seas. The dust storms they produced delivered minerals far and wide. The microbial films clinging to rocks experimented with the first tenuous steps of colonizing land. Though barren to the eye, these continents were laboratories of chemistry and geology, staging grounds for the future greening of the planet. They were like canvases waiting for paint, backdrops waiting for actors, landscapes waiting for stories. And what landscapes they were! Without vegetation to soften the edges, mountains stood raw and angular, their peaks sharp against the sky. Cliffs rose sheer, unbroken by trees. Plateaus stretched broad, featureless except for the scars of erosion. Deserts sprawled, not with dunes but with naked bedrock, fractured into polygons by endless cycles of heating and cooling. To walk across them would have been to feel small, dwarfed by a scale of stone rarely seen today. Vegetation in our modern world hides, fills and tames landscapes, but in the Cambrian, the continents were pure architecture, their bones exposed, their forms unapologetic. It was Earth in its geological underwear. The humour of it is undeniable. Imagine inviting a friend to visit the Cambrian and giving them a tour of the continents. Here we have a lovely expanse of rock, and over there, another stunning vista of rock. If you look very closely, you might spot a smear of bacteria on that boulder. Don't touch. It's delicate. The continents were not tourist attractions. They were empty stages, impressive in their scale, disappointing in their detail. You would not have found yourself sketching wildflowers or photographing waterfalls. You would have been sketching stones, dust, and more stuff. And yet, perhaps, there was a beauty in that emptiness. The continents of the Cambrian were landscapes of clarity, uncluttered by greenery, unsweetened by birdsong. They were worlds of form, texture, and shadow. Every ridge, every canyon, every ripple of sand was laid bare. The sunsets must have been astonishing. Orange and crimson light falling across rock unbroken by forests, shadows stretching for miles across open ground. Nights must have been profound, the stars unhindered by haze from vegetation or smoke from fire. The Cambrian continents were, in their own way, pure. If you squinted at them with imagination, you might even see foreshadowings of the future. Those microbial mats, slimy though they were, hinted at the greening to come. The erosion channels, unstable though they were, hinted at the rivers that would one day carve valleys filled with life. The barren deserts hinted at soils waiting to be made, dust waiting to feed the future. The continents were not finished products. They were drafts, sketches, outlines. Evolution had not yet painted them, but the canvas was already stretched. What is striking is how inhospitable they would have been to us. With oxygen thinner than today, every breath would have felt unsatisfying. With no food to be found, you would have starved quickly. With no shade to hide under, you would have baked in the sun. The land offered no shelter, no comfort, no companionship. It was not a place designed for humans or for any animal. For that matter, it was quite simply a land without life. And yet, this barrenness was essential. Because in being empty, the continents created the conditions for future colonization. The winds that tore across their surfaces distributed dust that would later enrich soils. The erosion that carved them would later create fertile valleys. The microbial mats that clung to them would later give rise to mosses, lichens, and eventually forests. The Cambrian continents were not failures. They were beginnings. Strange, stark, inhospitable beginnings. But beginnings nonetheless. So let us imagine one last time. Standing there, the wind howls, tugging at your clothes. Dust stings your eyes. Around you stretches a landscape of stone, dry riverbeds, etched into its surface, cliffs rising in silence. The only hint of life is a faint green smear on a wet rock, delicate as breath. It is lonely. It is harsh. It is alien. And yet, you cannot help but feel a twinge of awe. For this is Earth as it once was, stripped down to its essence, revealing the raw bones of a planet, still waiting for its adornments. That was the Cambrian continent, barren, windswept, microbial, and strange. Not welcoming, not comfortable, but magnificent in its emptiness. A land without life, yet a land filled with possibility. To speak of the Cambrian seas is to speak of a world in motion, not only of creatures drifting or crawling, but of relationships weaving themselves into the first true ecological webs. This was the age when life stopped being merely a collection of individuals and began to function as an interconnected network, where the survival of one often depended on the actions of another. The Cambrian oceans were not simply aquariums of oddities, they were systems, alive with cycles of energy, chains of predation, and balances of cooperation and competition. For the first time in Earth's history, there were ecosystems in the full sense of the word, dynamic, interactive, sometimes brutal, but always inventive. At the top of this early pyramid of power swam the apex hunters, and few figures captured this role better than the great predators of the time. These animals were the movers of the food chain, striking from above with sudden ferocity, pulling weaker creatures into their grasp. Their presence was not merely dramatic, it was formative. Predators forced their prey to adapt, to armor themselves, to burrow, to flee. Every attack rippled outward, shaping not only the immediate outcome of life or death, but also the evolutionary strategies of countless species. Predation for the first time became a force that structured ecosystems, ensuring that the Cambrian Sea was not a gentle soup of drifting organisms, but a theatre of pursuit and escape. Just beneath this predatory tier was a vast, restless middle ground, the trilobites and other armored crawlers who scuttled endlessly across the seabed. If the great hunters were the drama, these creatures were the backdrop, the chorus, the crowd. They occupied nearly every niche available, scraping surfaces, scavenging debris, competing fiercely with one another for space and resources. Imagine a seafloor covered with armored plates, each creature marching steadily forward, bumping into neighbors, jostling for feeding grounds. Some dug burrows, others grazed directly across microbial mats, others prowled for scraps left behind by bigger kills. They were not solitary operators, they were participants in a grand competition, a slow-motion battle for territory and sustenance. that never truly ended. If you could zoom out and watch the trilobites en masse, you might be reminded of a crowded subway station during rush hour. Everyone pushing forward, each determined to claim a little bit of space. What made this competition even fiercer was the fact that trilobites and their neighbors were not identical. Some were flat and wide, perfect for hugging the sediment. Others had spines and ridges, perhaps to ward off predators, perhaps simply to look unappetizing. Some specialized in burrowing, carving tiny tunnels into the soft seafloor where they could filter nutrients undisturbed. Others grazed across the open sediment, exposed to danger, but rewarded with abundant food. Each form represented a strategy, and each strategy was tested every day by the realities of hunger, predation, and competition. If one design worked, it spread. If it failed, it vanished, leaving only fossils as reminders of its brief attempt. The trilobite multitudes were not just countless, they were diverse, and that diversity made them central to the Cambrian ecosystem. But while predators and trilobites staged their endless chases and competitions, there was another group quietly, almost invisibly, holding the system together: the sponges. At first glance, sponges seem almost laughably unimpressive. They do not swim, they do not chase, they do not even appear to move. They sit, anchored, simple bodies filtering water through countless tiny pores. Yet in their stillness lay a remarkable power. Sponges were the filters of the Cambrian seas, tirelessly pumping water, extracting nutrients, and in the process clarifying the very medium in which all other creatures lived. To dismiss them as passive furniture is to miss their true ecological role. Without them, the seas would have been choked with debris, clouded with particles, less hospitable to everything else. By filtering vast quantities of water, they kept the system balanced, allowing light to penetrate and cycles to continue. Think of the Cambrian Sea as a vast community. The predators were the drama kings, loud and violent, but not especially numerous. The trilobites were the busy workers, filling every corner, always bustling, always colliding. The sponges were the custodians, the janitors, endlessly cleaning, endlessly cycling, ensuring that the mess left behind by all the activity never grew overwhelming. Together they formed a network, energy flowing upward as prey became food, nutrients cycling downward as debris broke apart, water moving constantly through the bodies of filter feeders. It was not a society with rules, of course, but it was a system, one where each action connected to another, where balance was fragile but persistent. The interactions were not always dramatic battles. Sometimes they were subtle nudges. A sponge filtering particles in one place could reduce turbidity nearby, making it easier for grazers to find food. A trilobite, burrowing into sediment, could stir up nutrients that drifting organisms then captured. The death of a large creature could provide sustenance for scavengers for weeks. Each act had consequences, and though the players did not know it, they were building the earliest versions of ecological networks that would one day shape forests, savannas, coral reefs, and cities. The humor of it all lies in perspective. To us, the Cambrian Ocean may seem alien, populated with strange forms and strange interactions. But if you squint, it also looks familiar. Predators chasing prey, we still see it in lions and zebras. Crowds of grazers competing for space, we see it in herds of wildebeests, in schools of fish, in commuters on trains. Quiet custodians keeping systems clean, we see it in earthworms, in fungi, in the sanitation workers of modern cities. The Cambrian ecosystem was not just alien, it was a prototype of patterns that would repeat endlessly, right up to the present day. Energy was the currency, and it flowed in loops. Sunlight struck the water's surface, fueling microscopic producers. Grazers consumed these producers. Predators consumed the grazers. Scavengers picked over the leftovers, and sponges cleaned up the rest. Nothing went to waste for long. Even excrement and carcasses became part of the cycle, broken down, redistributed, reabsorbed. It was not a tidy system. Storms, currents, and sudden deaths ensured that, but it was a functioning one, and function in the Cambrian was the miracle. What made this ecosystem extraordinary was not just its novelty but its resilience. Despite constant predation, trilobites thrived. Despite constant filtering, sponges endured. Despite the harshness of the chase, predators found enough to sustain themselves. There was, in short, balance. It was not balance in the serene, peaceful sense. It was balance in the sense of constant tension, a rope pulled tight between survival and failure. Every day, countless creatures failed, but the system endured, and in enduring it grew stronger. To walk through the Cambrian seas in imagination is to see a living machine. At one moment, a predator lunges, seizing its prey, tearing it apart. At the next, scavengers descend, scraping the remains. In the background, trilobites crawl endlessly, grazing, bumping, colliding, filling the gaps. Beneath them, sponges pump steadily, drawing water through their bodies, filtering, cycling, cleaning. It is messy, noisy, and violent, but also elegant in its function. Life, for the first time, was not just surviving, but interacting in systems that fed back upon themselves. And perhaps the most astonishing part is that it worked without any plan. No architect designed the roles, no leader assigned the duties. Each organism acted only for itself, seeking food, seeking survival. And yet together they formed a system greater than the sum of its parts. This is the true wonder of the Cambrian ecosystem. Not that it existed, but that it emerged spontaneously, a web of life woven from nothing but the pursuit of survival. To modern eyes, it is easy to anthropomorphize. We picture trilobites as stubborn little commuters, shoving for space. We picture predators as overbearing bullies, ruling the playground. We picture sponges as janitors sighing while they sweep up the mess. But humor aside, the Cambrian Sea was not a playground. It was a crucible. Every interaction mattered. Every chase, every graze, every pump of water through a sponge contributed to the flow of energy that sustained the whole. Without predators, prey populations might have overrun the system. Without grazers, microbial mats might have smothered surfaces. Without sponges, water might have grown clogged and stagnant. It was a puzzle, and remarkably, the pieces. So when we think of the Cambrian, let us not think only of strange monsters and alien shapes. Let us think of relationships, of the chase that shaped the hunted, of the competition that drove diversity, of the quiet filtering that kept the water clear. Let us think of a web being woven, thread by thread, not with foresight, but with persistence, until something astonishing appeared, an ecosystem. This was the Cambrian marine world, a stage where predators ruled but did not dominate, where trilobites competed but did not collapse, where sponges cleaned tirelessly and kept the water alive. It was not peaceful, it was not comfortable, but it was alive in every sense of the word alive, not just in individuals but in systems, in connections, in the first networks of life. And perhaps the most delightful thought of all is this: if you had placed a bet on survival, you might not have chosen the quiet sponges or the humble trilobites. You might have wagered on the predators, with their speed and their teeth. But the Cambrian teaches us that ecosystems are not won by spectacle alone. They are sustained by balance, by cooperation as much as by conflict. And in that balance, life found its first great rhythm, the Cambrian explosion. Few phrases in Earth's history sound as dramatic, and few events were as transformative. 500 million years ago, life on Earth had been plodding along quietly, confined mostly to simple forms. Slime mats, small worm-like creatures, tiny bodies without armor or jaws. Then almost suddenly, in geological terms, life seemed to burst into technicolor. Dozens of new body plans appeared. Organisms experimented with skeletons, with eyes, with claws, with strategies that would echo across all the eons to follow. It was as if evolution had been doodling in the margins for billions of years, and then, in the Cambrian, decided to draw across the whole page in bold ink. But what caused this explosion? Why did life suddenly flourish in such dazzling diversity? Scientists have puzzled over this for decades, and though the answers are complex, they form a story as fascinating as the event itself. One major factor was oxygen. For most of Earth's history before the Cambrian, oxygen levels in the atmosphere and oceans had been frustratingly low. Life could survive, yes, but not in forms that required much energy. Then in the late Precambrian leading into the Cambrian, oxygen levels rose. They did not yet reach modern amounts, but they climbed enough to change the rules. With more oxygen available, organisms could fuel more active metabolisms. They could grow larger. They could move faster. They could sustain muscles that twitched, flapped, crawled, and struck. In short, oxygen was the Cambrian equivalent of adding electricity to a quiet village. It lit everything up, powered everything forward. Without it, the great predators of the Cambrian would never have had the stamina to chase prey, and the prey would never have had the energy to escape. Oxygen was not just a gas in the air, it was the ticket that allowed life to join the race. But oxygen alone was not enough. After all, you can pump oxygen into a room, but without plans, tools, or instructions, nothing complex will build itself. Enter genetics. Deep in the cells of Cambrian creatures, genetic innovations occurred that opened entirely new doors. The most famous of these were mutations and expansions in developmental genes, especially the so-called Hox genes, the master switches that tell embryos how to build bodies. Before the Cambrian, body plans were simple and limited, but with new genetic blueprints, organisms could experiment with symmetry, with segmentation, with limbs and sensory organs. Suddenly, biology had a larger toolkit. It was as if evolution had been working with a box of crayons that only had 3 colors, and now it had been handed a deluxe set of 60. Why draw the same stick figure again and again when you can sketch trilobites, predators with grasping claws and creatures with eyes sprouting in unusual places? Genetic innovation also brought error, and error, paradoxically, brought creativity. Mutations shuffled codes, creating features that were strange, sometimes useless, but occasionally brilliant. A misplaced segment here, an extra appendage there, a tweak in symmetry, and suddenly a new survival strategy appeared. Most of these genetic experiments probably failed, leaving nothing but dead ends, but the Cambrian explosion shows us that enough of them succeeded to create a whole library of new forms. Evolution had discovered a truth it still follows today. Trial and error, repeated billions of times, can create wonder. Of course, genetics and oxygen were only the foundations. The real drama came when creatures began to interact with one another in ways that escalated the stakes. This was the birth of biological arms races. Once some organisms grew bigger and stronger, others had to develop defenses. Once predators learned to chase, prey learned to burrow or build armor. Once claws appeared, shells followed. Each innovation triggered another, in a cycle of escalation that fueled diversity. The Cambrian seas became laboratories of competition, where every advantage pressed others to invent countermeasures. It was not a peaceful world, it was a restless, energetic one, where survival meant constant adaptation. And in that restless energy lay opportunity. Competition forced creatures into niches they had never occupied before. Some dug into sediments, others floated higher in the water, others clung to surfaces. Each new niche opened a chance for yet another experiment in body design. Over time, these interactions multiplied into a kaleidoscope of strategies. Diversity was not just the product of oxygen and genetics. It was the product of creatures pushing and pulling against one another, carving out spaces where new forms could thrive. If evolution had been slow before, the Cambrian turned it into a sprint. Yet even sprints require a stable track. The Cambrian seas, by and large, offered just that. Compared to the violent swings of earlier ages, this was a time when the environment provided a relatively steady stage. The oceans were warm, widespread, and stable enough to allow complex life to persist. No cataclysm swept across the globe to wipe the slate clean. No sudden freeze locked everything in ice. Instead, conditions remained broadly supportive, giving organisms the time they needed to refine their experiments. It was as though Earth itself had finally said, "Okay, I've given you oxygen, I've given you genetic tools, I've cleared the stage. Now show me what you can do." And life answered with enthusiasm. When all these elements combined, oxygen fueling muscles, genes writing new blueprints, competition driving innovation, and stable environments allowing persistence, the result was explosive diversity. It was not an explosion of fire or violence, but an explosion of ideas. Evolution went from cautious sketches to bold strokes, from whispers to shouts. Dozens of animal lineages appeared in a geologically brief window, many of which would continue for hundreds of millions of years. Some would vanish, their experiments failing in the long run. Others would carry forward, becoming the ancestors of everything from insects to vertebrates to us. To call it a birthday party for life is not far off. The Cambrian explosion was loud, colourful, and slightly chaotic, like children released into a playground with too many toys. Oxygen was the cake, genes were the balloons, competition was the rowdy laughter, and the stable seas were the walls of the playground keeping everything safe. For 50 million years, the party raged, and evolution took full advantage. You, unfortunately, are about 51 million years late to RSVP. The humour of the Cambrian explosion lies partly in hindsight. Scientists peer at the rocks and see a sudden proliferation of strange forms, and we try to assign reasons to make it neat. Oxygen rose, genes changed, predators chased prey, the seas stabilized, but in truth, the Cambrian explosion was messy, full of accidents and improvisations. It was not one cause, but many, colliding together like instruments in a band that accidentally played a perfect chord. Oxygen provided volume, genes provided instruments, competition provided rhythm, and environment kept the beat. Together they made music, and the song was diversity. Imagine, if you will, standing on the edge of a Cambrian shore, and somehow being able to observe this drama unfold in real time. You would see creatures moving in ways no organism had ever moved before, crawling, swimming, burrowing, grasping. You would see shells gleaming in the water, eyes glittering in the light, appendages flashing as predators lunged and prey darted. You would see the first arms races in miniature, repeated endlessly. Attack, defense, counterattack, counter-defense. And through it all, you would sense the air of experimentation, as though life were an artist, throwing colours onto canvas, not knowing which strokes would last but unwilling to stop painting. The Cambrian explosion matters not just because it filled the seas with strangeness, but because it demonstrated what happens when conditions align. Life is opportunistic. Give it oxygen, it grows bigger. Give it genes, it grows stranger. Give it rivals, it grows fast. Give it stability, it grows everywhere. The Cambrian was proof that the ingredients of diversity are not mystical but real, tangible, measurable. When they converge, the results can be spectacular. And yet, there is a touch of humour in thinking about it from Earth's perspective. For billions of years, the planet hosted quiet, microscopic tenants. Then suddenly, in the Cambrian, it found itself overrun by creatures sprouting claws, eyes, armour, and jaws. It must have been like a landlord discovering that the quiet family renting the basement had suddenly invited an entire marching band over for rehearsal. The noise, the clutter, the constant scuffling, it was life's first great riot. Today we look back on the Cambrian explosion with awe, but also with humility. It reminds us that diversity is fragile, contingent on conditions that may or may not align again. It also reminds us that what we see now, the complexity of forests, coral reefs, and human societies, has roots in that ancient burst of creativity. We are, in a sense, products of that party 500 million years ago, inheritors of the experiments oxygen, genes, competition, and stability made possible. So when we speak of the Cambrian explosion, let us not think of a single spark, but of many sparks striking at once. Oxygen lit the fire, genes provided the fuel, competition fanned the flames, stability allowed the blaze to burn. Together they transformed Earth, turning a quiet planet into a noisy one, a simple world into a complex one. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most important events in the history of life. And if you ever feel the urge to complain that modern life is chaotic, remember this: it could be worse. You could be a trilobite, trying to outrun a predator with spiky claws and a circular mouth. You could be an early sponge just trying to filter water while chaos swirled around you. The Cambrian was life at its most experimental, its most unruly, its most exuberant. It was, in short, the biggest birthday party evolution ever threw, and we are still living in its afterglow. The Cambrian period may have ended over 500 million years ago, but its echoes remain etched, not in sound or memory, but in stone. Most of Earth's deep past is silent. Its creatures vanished without a trace. Their bodies dissolved into nothing. But sometimes, by chance and chemistry, the past leaves us a message, a snapshot preserved in rock, like a diary written not with ink, but with pressure and time. When we read these stony diaries, we discover creatures that defy imagination, worlds long gone but suddenly vivid, as if someone had pressed pause on the film of history. For the Cambrian, our greatest windows into this vanished world are the fossil deposits known as Lagerstätten, sites of extraordinary preservation. Among them, none shine brighter than the Burgess Shale in Canada and the Mason Shan shales in China. These places are not merely outcrops of rock. They are treasure vaults, archives, time capsules, holding secrets of creatures so strange they make modern biology look tame. Take the Burgess Shale, nestled high in the Canadian Rockies. To climb the steep trail that leads there today is to sweat, gasp and wonder how on earth something so ancient could be tucked into such a modern mountain. 500 million years ago, this was a quiet slope beneath the sea, where fine mud slid down and buried the remains of creatures in silty blankets. Normally, soft-bodied organisms vanish quickly after death, eaten by scavengers or dissolved by decay. But here, the mud sealed them off from oxygen, pressing them into the rock before they could vanish. The result? Fossils not just of shells and bones, but of soft tissues, eyes, tentacles, flaps, guts. The Burgess Shale is like nature's photo album, preserving not only skeletons but also whispers of the flesh that covered them. And what a photo album it is. Here we find the five-eyed Pabinia, the grasping predator, Anomalocaris, trilobites with their armor intact, and countless other creatures, many so strange they do not fit neatly into any modern group. Some appear like alien sketches, bodies segmented in odd ways, mouths where mouths should not be, limbs sprouting from unexpected places. The Burgess Shale reminds us that life's imagination has always exceeded ours. Looking at these fossils is like flipping through a surrealist art book and realizing it was painted not by humans but by evolution itself. Thousands of kilometers away, in Yunnan province, China, lies another fossil treasure, the Meishanshan shales, part of what scientists call the Chengjiang biota. Discovered in the 1980s, these rocks revealed creatures even older than those of the Burgess Shale, some of them astonishingly well preserved. Here too, soft tissues survived, antennae, gills, digestive systems, recorded in delicate impressions. If the Burgess Shale is a family album of Cambrian life, the Meishanshan shales are the baby pictures showing an even earlier chapter of strange experiments in form. Together, these two sites complement one another, Canada's mountains and China's hills, each whispering secrets from seas long vanished. What makes these deposits extraordinary is not just the creatures themselves, but the fact that we can see them at all. Think of the odds. A soft-bodied animal dies in the sea. Normally it vanishes within days, eaten or rotted. For it to become a fossil, it must be buried quickly, sealed from scavengers, shielded from oxygen, pressed by sediment, and then survive 500 million years of geological chaos, mountain building, earthquakes, erosion, without being destroyed. The probability is vanishingly small, and yet, somehow, whole communities were caught and preserved. The Burgess Shale and Meishanshan shales are not typical, they are miracles. They are, to put it lightly, Earth's equivalent of winning the fossil lottery. When paleontologists first cracked open these slabs, they must have felt like detectives finding secret case files. Every split rock revealed a silhouette, a creature with flaps, spines, or eyes, flattened but legible. Some were instantly recognizable as trilobites, or worms. Others seemed so bizarre they sparked debates that lasted decades. Was this piece a claw or an entire animal? Was that ring a mouth or an anus? Was this a head or simply a mistake of preservation? Anomalocaris, perhaps the most infamous, was originally misidentified as three separate animals, its claw mistaken for a shrimp, its mouth mistaken for a jellyfish, its body mistaken for a worm. Only later did scientists piece them together into one terrifying predator. Fossils, it turns out, are like puzzles scattered across time, with many pieces missing and no box to show the final picture. And yet, from these puzzles we reconstruct worlds. The Burgess Shale tells us that the Cambrian Sea was not just filled with armored creatures, but also with soft-bodied wanderers, delicate drifters, and predators with elaborate appendages. The Meishan shells add even more detail, revealing how early some of these strategies appeared and how quickly life was experimenting with form. Together they reveal a Cambrian that was not a quiet nursery but a bustling workshop, filled with strange prototypes, some destined for extinction, others for triumph. There is a kind of mystery to these fossils too. The rock does not speak in sentences, it speaks in impressions, outlines, shadows. Scientists peer through microscopes at the faint traces of muscle fibers or gill filaments, trying to read whispers 500 million years old. Sometimes the marks are so delicate that arguments break out. Is that really an eye, or just a wrinkle in the mud? Is that a gut or a trick of preservation? The fossils give us clues, but not certainties. They are like riddles written by Earth, answers smudged, hints left tantalizing but incomplete. And here is where humor slips in. Paleontology at its heart often looks like people squinting at smudges in rock and insisting they see an animal. This clearly is a jaw. No, it is an anus. You're both wrong. It's just a crease. One can imagine the Cambrian creatures laughing at us across time, amused that we are trying to reconstruct their bodies from what amounts to paper-thin impressions. But laugh as they might, the rock is the only voice they left us, and we listen with reverence. The Burgess Shale, discovered in 1909 by Charles Doolittle Walcott, has become legendary in science. Walcott himself collected tens of thousands of specimens, carting them down mountain trails on horseback, not fully realizing the scope of what he had found. Decades later, new analyses revealed details he could not have imagined, showing that many of these creatures belonged to groups previously unknown. The Mabushan shales, revealed much later, expanded the story, showing that these oddities were not confined to one place but were part of a global pattern. Together they tell us that the Cambrian world was filled with strange forms everywhere, not just in one lucky deposit. What these fossils truly give us, though, is imagination anchored in evidence. Without them, the Cambrian would remain a blur of shells and guesses. With them, it becomes vivid. We can picture creatures with stalked eyes, circular mouths, long proboscises, delicate fins. We can imagine their movements, their interactions, their strangeness. The fossils act as postcards from a world beyond memory, reminders that life has always been wilder than our imagination allows. And perhaps that is their greatest gift: humility. The Burgess Shale and Meishan shells show us that life's history is not a straight line of improvement, but a branching, chaotic, exuberant experiment. Many of the forms preserved there are extinct, their lineages cut short, their designs abandoned. Yet, for a time they thrived, leaving impressions in mud that would outlast mountains. To us they look alien, but in their time they were as real and ordinary as sparrows or crabs are today. The fossils remind us that strangeness is not the exception, but the rule, and that our own familiar world is just one outcome among many possibilities. To visit these sites today is to experience both wonder and irony. The Burgess Shale lies in high alpine meadows, surrounded by pine forests and glaciers, utterly different from the warm seas where its creatures once lived. The Meishan shales lie amid rolling hills in China, villages and farms nearby, far removed from the shallow waters that once covered them. You stand on rock trails, hammer in hand, and realize you are touching the compressed remains of animals that lived before trees, before insects, before vertebrates walked on land. The dissonance is staggering. And yet, the rocks speak. Not loudly, not clearly, but persistently. Every fossil slab is a voice from deep time, saying we were here, we moved, we lived, we fed, we vanished. And against all odds, we left our shadows for you to find. Reading those shadows is both science and poetry, both detective work and reverie. It requires microscopes and patience, but it also invites wonder. So when we talk about Cambrian fossils, let us not think only of bones and shells. Let us think of shadows in stone, of delicate tissues pressed into mud, of creatures immortalized by chance. Let us think of Burgess Shale and Meishan shales as Earth's secret libraries, their shelves stacked not with books but with imprints, each one a story waiting to be read. These sites are not just paleontological curiosities, they are cultural treasures, as important to understanding who we are as any ancient temple or manuscript. They tell us that life is ancient, that strangeness is natural, that survival leaves marks even when voices are gone. They are diaries of the earth, written in mud, bound in stone, preserved for readers who arrived 500 million years too late. If you ever hold a slab from one of these deposits, you might be tempted to laugh. The imprint of a creature may look like a smear, a squiggle, a child's doodle, but then you remember this doodle is 500 million years old, the imprint of something that once swam, fed, and perhaps feared, and suddenly the smear becomes sacred. That is the gift of Cambrian fossils. They turn stone into story, silence into whispers, absence into memory. They remind us that life's history is not gone, only hidden, waiting for us to split the rock and rain. The Cambrian Earth was no quiet stage. It was not a planet of still landscapes and polite coastlines. It was instead a construction site in perpetual motion, filled with rumbling volcanoes, restless continents, and erosion that scraped and sculpted endlessly. To imagine Earth in the Cambrian is to imagine a world not yet finished, still clanging with the hammer and chisel of geology. Volcanoes spewed, continents drifted, mountains rose only to be torn back down, and coastlines redrew themselves in ceaseless revision. If the living world was experimenting with forms in the water, the solid Earth was experimenting with shapes on land and beneath the seas. The Cambrian planet was alive not only with organisms, but with its own restless crust. Let us begin with the volcanoes, those fiery mouths that connected Earth's deep interior with its fragile surface. In the Cambrian, volcanic activity was vigorous as it had been for eons before. The crust was thinner in many regions than today, riddled with weaknesses, seams and zones of collision, where magma could find its way upward. Volcanoes erupted across continents and islands, releasing plumes of ash and rivers of lava. Some were explosive, towers of fire and stone that painted the sky with ash clouds. Others were effusive, oozing lava across plains in glowing floods. For the creatures nearby, it was both spectacle and catastrophe, a display of power that left behind fresh rock, even as it buried landscapes. Volcanoes were more than scenery, they were chemists. Each eruption poured carbon dioxide, sulfur gases, and minerals into the air and sea. Carbon dioxide thickened the atmosphere, feeding the greenhouse warmth. Ash, settling in water, enriched basins with nutrients. Lava hardened into new crust, creating ridges, plateaus, and islands. Volcanoes were destructive, yes, but they were also creative, laying down the raw ingredients for future environments. Imagine Earth as a cook in a cosmic kitchen. Volcanoes were its ladles, scooping magma from deep pots and splattering it across the table. Messy, dangerous, but essential. While volcanoes roared, the continents themselves were not idle. Plate tectonics, that slow but inexorable conveyor belt of the crust, was hard at work in the Cambrian. Continents moved like sluggish dancers, inching their way across the globe. Gondwana, the supercontinent sprawled across the southern hemisphere, shifted gradually, while Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia wandered separately in the north. They were never still, never content to stay in place. Like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, they slid, rotated, and collided, guided by convection currents in Earth's mantle. To us, plate motion seems unbearably slow, centimeters per year, but over millions of years, those centimeters added up. A coastline advanced, a basin opened, a mountain range rose. In the Cambrian, this motion redrew the globe, shaping ocean basins and continental shelves, and with each shift, the planet's face changed. A shallow sea appeared, where once there was land, an island chain rose, dotting the horizon. A collision lifted mountains, only for erosion to wear them down again. The continents were never permanent. They were restless rafts on molten seas, drifting on currents too deep to see. This restless drifting carried consequences. As continents moved, they shaped the circulation of oceans, redirecting currents, changing the distribution of nutrients, and altering coastlines where creatures lived. As volcanoes erupted, they released gases that influenced the air, sometimes warming, sometimes cooling, always tweaking the balance of the planet. As erosion sculpted landscapes, it delivered minerals into the seas, feeding chemical cycle. The living world did not exist apart from geology. It was entangled with it, forever influenced by the movements of crust and the tempers of magma. And then there was erosion, Earth's quiet sculptor. Rain fell, rivers ran, winds howled, and in the absence of plants to anchor the land, erosion worked with unrelenting efficiency. Mountains crumbled, cliffs fractured, dust storms rose from bare ground, scouring stone. Every drop of rain carved a little more. Every gust of wind carried grains away. Every river spread sediment across deltas. In the Cambrian, erosion was faster, harsher, because nothing held it back. Land surfaces were naked, exposed, vulnerable. The continents were like sandcastles left at the mercy of the tide, always being reshaped, never secure. Erosion did not simply wear things away, it fed the seas. The particles it carried tumbled into rivers, washed into estuaries, and settled in shallow water. Minerals from these sediments nourished microbial mats and fed chemical cycles, turning barren erosion into fertile inputs for the marine world. In this way, erosion was both destroyer and provider, stripping the land while enriching the water. A geologist might call it redistribution, but it was more poetic than that. The continents gave up pieces of themselves to feed the seas. To picture the Cambrian Earth, imagine a construction site where every machine is running at once. Volcanoes blast like jackhammers, sending plumes of smoke and ash skyward. Continents grind against one another like bulldozers in slow motion, pushing and pulling, tearing and building. Erosion acts as an army of chisels, scraping and smoothing, reshaping the surfaces already laid. The result is noisy, messy, and never finished. If you wanted stability, you were in the wrong era. The Cambrian Earth was a project always under revision, always being remade. The drama of volcanoes deserves a second look, because they were not just fiery displays, but ongoing cycles of destruction and renewal. When ash fell into seas, it blanketed the seafloor, sometimes smothering life, sometimes providing nutrients. When lava cooled, it became basalt, new crust spreading at mid-ocean ridges or forming island chains. Some volcanoes erupted underwater, their lava meeting water with explosive fury, blasting steam and fragments into the depths. Others erupted on land, rivers of fire pouring across barren slopes. In every case, they altered the environment, sometimes catastrophically, sometimes beneficially. To stand near a Cambrian volcano, though you would not survive long, would have been to witness both terror and creation, heat and renewal. Plate tectonics, too, carried its own rhythm of drama. Subduction zones swallowed old crust, recycling it into the mantle. Rifts opened, pulling continents apart, letting magma rise. Collisions compressed crust, raising mountains. The Cambrian Earth was alive with these motions, though they occurred too slowly for any creature to notice in real time. But over millions of years, their effects were profound. Where continents collided, mountain ranges rose, only to be worn down. Where rifts opened, seas expanded, inviting new habitats. The continents, though barren, were active players in shaping the planet's future. Humor sneaks in when we imagine these processes at human scale. Volcanoes belching endlessly like cosmic stovetops, continents creeping like stubborn snails, colliding only after millions of years of awkward approach. Erosion acting like a mischievous child, constantly knocking down whatever geology tried to build. The Cambrian Earth was dramatic, yes, but also a little ridiculous if you think about it in human terms. Plate tectonics is the slowest dance party in the universe, with moves so drawn out they make glaciers look speedy. And volcanoes? They were the over-enthusiastic guests, always blowing their tops, leaving messes behind for erosion to clean up. Yet, beneath the humor there was grandeur. The Cambrian Earth was sculpting itself, laying the foundations for continents, mountains, and basins that would shape the ages to come. Every eruption, every drift, every storm of erosion added to the planet's evolving face. Though barren and raw, these landscapes were the blueprints upon which future forests, rivers, and cities would one day rest. To look at the Cambrian Earth is to see not a finished product, but a work in progress, rough but magnificent. It is humbling to think that while life in the seas was busy trying out eyes, limbs, and armor, the solid Earth was engaged in its own experiments, Volcanoes spewing, continents creeping, erosion scribbling across rock. Together, these processes made a planet in transition, dynamic and dramatic, always reshaping itself. The Cambrian Earth was not quiet, not still. It was a world of fire, stone, and water, locked in endless interplay. So when we imagine the Cambrian, let us not think only of strange creatures in the seas. Let us also think of volcanoes painting the skies with ash, of continents drifting like slow dancers, of erosion tirelessly carving and reshaping. The Cambrian Earth was a planet alive in every sense, not just biologically but geologically. It was quite literally under construction, a world always in motion, always changing, always dramatic. That was the Cambrian Earth, fiery, restless, eroded and magnificent, volcanoes as cosmic ovens, continents as patient dancers, erosion as the tireless sculptor, a planet in the making, never still, always becoming. And though no human eye saw it, the rocks remember, carved with the signatures of fire and drift and time. The Cambrian period was not just a chapter in Earth's story, it was the moment life discovered the art of invention. Before this time, organisms had been simple, soft-bodied, modest, drifting quietly through existence. Then suddenly, in what feels like evolution's great workshop, creatures began to build, test, and refine features that would echo across all of history. Eyes gleamed where none had been before. Shells and exoskeletons clinked into place, transforming bodies into walking fortresses. Segments, appendages, and muscular structures arranged themselves into blueprints that countless descendants would follow. The Cambrian was less a quiet nursery and more a laboratory filled with prototypes, each one a wild experiment in survival. Some of these experiments failed, but others set the stage for every complex organism that followed. Perhaps the most dramatic invention of the Cambrian was sight. Before this period, vision barely existed. Creatures sensed light and dark. Yes, but the idea of focusing, of perceiving shapes, of seeing a predator before it struck, was new. In this age, animals like a Pabinia sprouted not one, not two, but 5 eyes perched atop stalks, scanning the world in every direction. Imagine what a revelation this must have been to look, truly look rather than merely feel. Suddenly, the environment became a visible landscape. Prey could be spotted, predators could be avoided, currents and shadows could be interpreted. Sight changed everything, turning existence from a guessing game into a visual drama. And though a Pabinia's arrangement may strike us as absurd, 5 eyes staring in different directions like a perpetual state of confusion, it was revolutionary. From then on, vision became one of life's most powerful tools, refined into compound eyes in trilobites, lenses in later creatures, and eventually the eyes through which we read this history today. But sight was only one of the Cambrian's inventions. At roughly the same time, armor arrived. Trilobites, those tireless crawlers of the seafloor, perfected the art of exoskeletons, hard shells of calcite and chitin that encased their soft tissues like medieval knights. For billions of years, life had been soft and vulnerable, easy pickings for anything with a mouth. The trilobites changed the rules. With armor, they could withstand bites, burrow into sediment, or simply roll into tight, defensive balls. Their shells did more than protect. They preserved, leaving behind a fossil record that still astonishes us today. But in their own time, trilobite armor was an evolutionary triumph, a shield that shifted the balance between predator and prey. Once armor existed, predators had to find ways to pierce it, leading to stronger jaws and sharper claws. The invention of the hard shell did not end the arms race, it ignited it. And armor was contagious. Once trilobites demonstrated the power of a hard covering, other lineages joined the experiment. Small shelly fauna appeared, tiny creatures building protective cases. Early mollusk-like forms began to explore the strength of calcium carbonate. Even soft-bodied organisms began adopting spacules and plates, dabbling in defense. The Cambrian world began to click and clatter with the sound of shells colliding, scraping, and resisting. What had once been a silent ocean filled with soft bodies became a noisy one, alive with the crunch of armor meeting appendage. Alongside eyes and armor came a third invention: complexity. Bodies themselves grew intricate, their blueprints expanding from simple tubes or blobs into segmented differentiated structures, muscles layered into sheets, capable of coordinated movement, nervous systems branched, carrying signals from one end of the body to the other, digestive systems specialized, with mouths, stomachs, and intestines dividing tasks, appendages sprouted for crawling, swimming, grasping, or digging. This was not a mere increase in size. It was an increase in sophistication. Life had discovered that with complexity came opportunity, more ways to move, more ways to eat, more ways to survive. Take the trilobites again. Their segmented bodies were not just armored plates, they were flexible units, each able to move independently. This segmentation allowed them to scuttle efficiently, to burrow, to roll up when threatened. Their compound eyes, among the earliest advanced visual systems, gave them awareness of their surroundings. They were not just armored bugs, they were highly functional machines of survival, modular and adaptable. Or consider the strange predators like Anomalocaris, with its flapping swimming lobes, its jointed claws, and its circular mouth. It was a patchwork of new ideas, stitched together into a predator that ruled its seas. It may look bizarre to us, but in the Cambrian it was cutting edge, fast, mobile, efficient. Evolution was improvising, and in improvisation it created creatures that were both peculiar and powerful. The rise of complexity also meant the rise of specialization. Some organisms became burrowers, carving safe tunnels in the sediment. Others became swimmers, refining flaps or appendages into propulsion systems. Others clung to surfaces, filtering food from the water. Each specialization made bodies more elaborate, and each elaboration opened new pathways for further invention. Complexity, once started, was self-reinforcing, encouraging new experiments with every generation. It is tempting to see all this as progress, as if the Cambrian creatures were fumbling toward us, toward intelligence, toward humanity. But that is not the right story. These features, eyes, armor, complex body structures, were not steps toward us specifically. They were steps toward possibility. They allowed life to explore more niches, to take more forms, to branch in more directions. Some of those directions led to lineages we know well, others led nowhere, extinguished in extinction. The Cambrian was not destiny, it was opportunity. Still, opportunity can look comical when viewed across time. Consider Opabinia again, waving its trunk-like proboscis, its 5 eyes swiveling in different directions. It looks like a creature designed in a rush, assembled from spare parts, or trilobites marching in their thousands, like tiny armored Roombas endlessly vacuuming the seafloor, or Anomalocaris with its pineapple slicer mouth and grabby arms. To us they look odd, alien, even cartoonish, and yet, in their world, they were serious, efficient, and successful. Evolution is not an artist seeking beauty, it is a tinkerer seeking function. If something works, even if it looks absurd, and many of these absurdities stuck. Eyes did not vanish, they proliferated, refined into sharper and sharper instruments. Armor did not fade, it became the foundation for arthropods, mollusks, brachiopods, and countless others. Segmentation did not disappear, it shaped the bodies of worms, insects, crustaceans, and even the vertebral columns of our own lineage. Complexity did not collapse, it expanded into forests, coral reefs, and brains. The Cambrian inventions were not passing fads, they were the beginning of patterns that would endure across hundreds of millions of years. What makes the Cambrian so exciting is the sense of experimentation. It was as if life had been handed a new set of tools and decided to use all of them at once. Eyes? Yes. Put them everywhere. Armor? Cover the body. See what happens. Segmentation? Add more segments. Then rearrange them. Nervous systems? Make them longer, faster, more coordinated. The Cambrian seas were filled with prototypes, some elegant, some ridiculous, all part of a grand improvisation. Out of this chaos came the building blocks of modern life. And though we marvel at the strangeness, we should also marvel at the durability. 500 million years later, the same features still dominate. Eyes of countless kinds, from compound fly eyes to eagle vision, armor in crabs, beetles and turtles, segmented bodies in worms and insects, complexity woven into every corner of the tree of life. We are not living in the shadow of the Cambrian. We are living in its legacy. There is humor here too if you let yourself see it. Imagine the Cambrian as an inventor's workshop. On one bench, a trilobite is clanking around in its new armor, proudly testing its roll-up defense like a child discovering a blanket fort. On another, Opabinia is swiveling all five eyes at once, bumping into things as it tries to coordinate. And Nomalocaris is in the corner, flapping dramatically, showing off its claws while sponges sit quietly unimpressed, filtering water as they always have. It is chaotic, noisy, and more than a little silly. But this workshop built the foundations of everything that followed. So what did the Cambrian give us? It gave us the concept of vision, the ability to see the world and respond with precision. It gave us the concept of armor, the ability to protect the vulnerable with hardened defenses. It gave us the concept of complexity, the ability to build bodies not as single units, but as integrated systems of parts. These were not small steps, they were revolutions. They transformed life from simple drifters into active participants in an ever-changing environment. The Cambrian was not the end of the story, of course. Evolution continued, refining and expanding. But it was the moment the story truly began to take on depth. The moment the characters gained tools that allowed them to shape their fates in new ways. Eyes to see, armor to endure, complexity to adapt. These were the stepping stones that made all else possible. Without them, the forests, the birds, the mammals, the humans would never have arrived. And so, when we picture the Cambrian, let us not think only of strangeness. Let us think of invention. Let us think of a planet alive with prototypes, of creatures trying out eyes, shells, and complex bodies, not knowing what would last, but willing to try. Let us think of life as an artist, sketching wildly, spilling ink, making mistakes, but occasionally stumbling on masterpieces. The Cambrian was not neat, but it was brilliant. In the end, the Cambrian period was less a quiet dawn and more a fireworks show of invention. The sparks were eyes, shells, and complexity, flaring brightened and never fading. We live still in their glow, beneficiaries of experiments 500 million years old, and though those creatures would not recognize us, we owe them everything. Their inventions became our inheritance, their prototypes our reality. That was the Cambrian's gift. Not perfection, not finality, but possibility. The possibility of vision, of defense, of complexity. The possibility of life expanding beyond simplicity into richness. The possibility, ultimately, of us. The Cambrian period is not just a story of long-dead creatures and vanished seas. It is also a classroom, a kind of ancient textbook written in stone and time. Its pages are not bound in paper, but in continents, fossils, and geochemical signatures. Its lessons are not written in words, but in patterns. Patterns of shifting landmasses, experimenting life, and climate swaying under the heavy hand of carbon dioxide. When scientists peer into the Cambrian, they are not indulging in nostalgia. They are gathering data, learning about the rules of the planet, rules that still apply to us today. Gondwana may have drifted apart, trilobites may be gone, and the greenhouse atmosphere may have shifted, but the principles remain. The Cambrian teaches us about tectonics, about the beginnings of biological plexity, and about the consequences of greenhouse climate. And if we listen carefully, it also gives us clues about our own future. Start with geology, for in the Cambrian the continents themselves were teachers. Gondwana, that sprawling supercontinent, dominated the southern hemisphere. It was a giant stitched together from fragments of what we now know as South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica. Alongside it were smaller continental blocks like Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia, drifting independently. Their motions were slow but relentless, guided by plate tectonics, the invisible conveyor belt powered by Earth's mantle. In their wandering they created basins, shallow seas, and mountain belts, constantly reshaping the stage upon which life played out. To study these ancient arrangements is to glimpse the choreography of continents, how they assemble, how they drift, and how they fracture. Modern geology leans on the Cambrian to understand how supercontinents form and break apart. Gondwana was not the first, nor the last, but it offers a clear case study of continental assembly by tracing its sutures, ancient collision zones preserved in today's rocks. scientists can reconstruct the processes of orogeny, the mountain-building events that weld continents together. They can also observe how Gondwana's vast bulk influenced ocean circulation, climate, and sedimentation. These lessons are not locked in the past. They apply to our present understanding of plate tectonics and even to predicting the future supercontinent that Earth may one day host. Studying the Cambrian continents is like looking at a rehearsal for a play that is still ongoing. Geology's Cambrian lessons extend further. The distribution of shallow seas around Gondwana and its neighbours shaped not only coastlines but also the chemistry of oceans. As erosion washed minerals from bare land into the seas, sedimentary layers recorded the exchanges between land and water. These layers, preserved in limestone, shale, and sandstone, are now studied to understand Earth's carbon cycle. By analyzing isotopes in Cambrian rocks, geologists reconstruct how carbon moved through the system, how it cycled between air, water, and rock, and in doing so they gain insights into the delicate balance of carbon that still governs our climate today. The Cambrian rocks, in their silence, carry warnings and instructions about what happens when greenhouse gases dominate the sky. Turn now to biology, where the Cambrian serves as an archive of invention. Life in this period did not simply exist, it experimented. Eyes appeared, shells hardened, body plans diversified. Though we leave the intricate details of evolutionary pathways aside, what matters here is that the Cambrian reveals the mechanics of biological innovation. It shows us that once oxygen levels rose and genetic toolkits expanded, life was able to proliferate into forms more complex, more varied, and more ambitious. For modern biology, this is not merely an interesting fact. It is a reminder of how opportunity fuels diversity. When environments open niches, organisms fill them. When new biological tools become available, evolution finds ways to use them. The Cambrian, then, teaches us about possibility. It shows that complexity does not appear gradually and politely, but often in bursts, when conditions align. This understanding helps scientists frame modern questions about biodiversity. How quickly can ecosystems respond to change? What happens when new pressures or new opportunities emerge? The Cambrian offers case studies written in trilobites, sponges, and predators, teaching us that life can be both fragile and explosively inventive. And though the creatures themselves are gone, the rules of adaptation they embodied remain etched into the DNA of every living thing. Biology in the Cambrian also teaches us humility. Many of the creatures preserved in sites like the Burgess Shale or the Shan shales are unlike anything alive today. They remind us that the modern world is only a sliver of life's full imagination. Scientists studying them are confronted with body plans that do not fit neat categories, with forms that blur the boundaries of classification. The lesson: life is not limited to our expectations. It invents, it improvises, it surprises. For modern researchers exploring genetic engineering, synthetic biology, or the search for life beyond Earth, the Cambrian stands as a reminder: expect the unexpected. And then there is climate, the great backdrop against which geology and biology unfolded. The Cambrian world was warm, perhaps uncomfortably so by modern standards. With carbon dioxide levels far higher than today, greenhouse conditions blanketed the planet. Global average temperatures hovered around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. There were no polar ice caps, no great sheets of frozen water reflecting sunlight. Instead, warmth extended from equator to pole, creating a planet that was, in essence, a global sauna. For organisms in the sea, this warmth provided stability, but it also created challenges. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere were lower than today, making metabolism more difficult. Rainfall patterns swung between coastal deluges and inland aridity. It was, in every sense, a greenhouse world. The Cambrian greenhouse offers modern science a cautionary tale. By studying isotopic signatures in Cambrian rocks, scientists can reconstruct levels of CO2 and temperature, mapping how the climate system responded to changes in atmospheric chemistry. They see that high CO2 led to warmth. That warmth influenced ocean circulation, and that circulation fed back into the distribution of life. These lessons resonate powerfully today as humanity wrestles with rising carbon emissions. The Cambrian shows us that the link between CO2 and climate is not theory, it is history. It has happened before, and the planet responded dramatically. There is humor here too, if we choose to see it. Imagine describing the Cambrian world to someone as a kind of cosmic sauna, continents sweating under volcanic skies, seas steaming under greenhouse blankets, trilobites crawling as if they were unwitting spa guests. Or picture Gondwana, that giant supercontinent, sprawling lazily across the southern hemisphere like an oversized rock, couch potato, while winds and erosion stripped its surface clean. The Cambrian was serious in its consequences, but in imagination it can also make us laugh. Earth was trying out ideas with both rocks and organisms, and the results were sometimes magnificent, sometimes absurd. Yet beneath the humor lies profound insight. The Cambrian teaches us that Earth is a dynamic system where geology, biology, and climate are forever intertwined. Volcanoes belch carbon, raising temperatures. Erosion delivers nutrients, fueling life. Life, in turn, alters chemistry, shifting oxygen and carbon balances. Nothing exists in isolation. To understand our planet, we must see it as a web of feedbacks, each strand tugging on the others. The Cambrian offers an early chapter of this interplay, clear enough to study, yet distant enough to reveal the long arcs of planetary change. Modern science draws from these lessons in countless ways. Geologists model plate tectonics by studying Cambrian sutures. Biologists frame biodiversity studies by looking at Cambrian experimentation. Climate scientists test greenhouse theories against Cambrian carbon data. Even astrobiologists use Cambrian insights, asking, if life on Earth could leap into complexity so suddenly under certain conditions, what might happen on other planets with similar opportunities? The Cambrian is not just past, it is precedent. And this is perhaps the greatest value of the Cambrian for us today. It expands our sense of what Earth can be. It shows us continents gathered differently, climates run hotter, life stranger. It reminds us that the world is not static, but endlessly changing, and that the patterns of change leave traces we can read. When scientists split Cambrian rocks, measure isotopes, or trace fossils of shells and eyes, they are not just indulging in curiosity, they are building models of Earth systems, models that help us predict the consequences of our actions today. So when we think of the Cambrian, let us not think only of strangeness. Let us think of science. Let us think of Gondwana teaching us how continents dance. Let us think of trilobites teaching us how life experiments. Let us think of greenhouse skies teaching us the power of carbon. Let us think of rocks not as silent stone but as textbooks written in deep time, waiting for curious minds to read. The Cambrian period was not only the dawn of animal life, it was the dawn of understanding. Its geology, biology, and climate form a trilogy of lessons, still unfolding, and as long as we study them, we are students in Earth's oldest classroom, learning how a restless planet, a creative biosphere, and a volatile atmosphere together write the story of life. That is the science of the Cambrian, not a distant curiosity, but a living archive. Gondwana as a teacher of tectonics, shells and eyes as teachers of biology, carbon dioxide as a teacher of climate, a textbook written in stone, still legible after 500 million years, and if we pay attention perhaps we will learn enough to keep our own chapter from ending too soon. The Cambrian period is not just an entry in the timeline of Earth. It is a mirror, a whisper, a reminder that existence itself is fragile and magnificent. 500 million years ago, the seas of our planet swirled with forms of life unlike anything we know today. Trilobites marching across the seabed like armored pilgrims, predators with alien mouths, creatures sprouting eyes in unlikely places. It was a world that feels both familiar and utterly strange. Yet beyond the odd shapes and dramatic stories, the Cambrian carries a meaning deeper than its creature. It asks us to reflect on the fragile beginnings of complexity, on the vulnerability of life, and on the place of Earth itself in the vast theatre of the cosmos. Consider first the fragility. Life in the Cambrian was daring, but delicate. Eyes blinked open for the first time, shells clinked into place, bodies experimented with form, yet every creature lived on a knife edge. Oxygen levels were low, predators were relentless, environments could change without warning. Each survival was provisional, each triumph temporary. When we look at the Cambrian, we are reminded that life does not emerge fully formed, but hesitantly, through risk and improvisation. It is easy for us, sitting comfortably in modern societies, to forget that our entire history rests on such precarious beginnings. The Cambrian teaches humility. The first steps of complexity were taken not in confidence, but in uncertainty. And then there is the lesson of impermanence. Trilobites once covered the seafloor in unimaginable numbers, yet they are gone. Predators like Anomalocaris once ruled, yet they vanished. The Cambrian seas were filled with experiments, and most of them failed in the long run. What seemed eternal was fleeting. What seemed dominant was temporary. Earth continued its patient orbit around the sun, indifferent to the triumphs and tragedies of its tenants. From this perspective, the Cambrian is not merely history, it is philosophy. It shows us that all dominance is provisional, all empires end, all rulers fade. Even the greatest trilobite was only borrowing time. But impermanence does not mean insignificance. On the contrary, the Cambrian reminds us that even temporary sparks of life can alter the course of existence. Eyes, shells, segmented bodies, these were inventions born in fragility, yet they reshaped everything that followed. A trilobite does not live today, yet its armored design echoes in crabs, beetles, and scorpions. Orpobenia vanished, but its oddity reminds us that imagination itself is part of evolution's method. Even what disappears leaves traces, ripples carried forward. The philosophical message is clear: nothing lasts, but nothing is wasted. Step back even further, and the Cambrian speaks not just of Earth but of the cosmos. Picture our planet at that time, a mostly blue sphere, its continents barren, its oceans teeming with strange life. Floating in the black of space, it would have looked ordinary from afar, just another rock orbiting a star. Yet within its seas, something extraordinary was unfolding, the first great flowering of complexity. From a cosmic perspective, the Cambrian was a spark in the dark, a tiny planet declaring that life can do more than exist. It can imagine, experiment, diversify. The trilobites did not know it, but they were part of something cosmic. They were the universe trying out new forms of being, sketching in water what might someday walk on land or gaze at stars. This perspective is both humbling and exhilarating. Humbling because it shows how small we are. We are not the center of the universe. We are not even the center of our own planet's story. We are the latest page in a book that began long before us, written by creatures whose names we struggle to pronounce. And yet, it is exhilarating, because it shows that even small sparks matter. A trilobite crawling on the seabed was part of the same story that would lead, through winding paths, to the hands now typing these words. The Cambrian teaches us that the cosmos is not silent. It speaks through the language of life, however strange, however fleeting. Of course, philosophy must sometimes laugh. The Cambrian, for all its grandeur, was also absurd. Orpobinea with its 5 eyes looked perpetually confused, as if asking the universe for directions. Anomalocaris hunted with a circular mouth that resembled a pineapple slicer. Trilobites rolled into balls like clumsy roly-polies. Life was serious about survival, but to our eyes it appears comical, cartoonish, surreal. Perhaps the universe has always had a sense of humor. Perhaps absurdity is as much a part of existence as elegance. The Cambrian suggests that laughter and wonder can coexist, that even the strangest forms have dignity. And what of Earth itself in this drama? The Cambrian reminds us that our planet is not just a stage, but a partner in the play. Its seas provided the cradle, its chemistry the tools, its atmosphere the constraint. Without Earth's cooperation, no trilobite would have marched, no Orpobinea would have blinked. Yet Earth too is fragile. Its climate swayed, its continents shifted, its seas rose and fell. It was and remains a living planet, always in flux. The Cambrian reminds us that we are not separate from our world but deeply entangled with it. To reflect on trilobites is to reflect on ourselves, because their fragility is ours, their impermanence ours. When night falls and we look at the stars, the Cambrian whispers a final lesson. Out there, among those countless suns, may be other worlds, other oceans, other experiments in life. We do not know whether trilobite-like creatures crawl across alien seafloors, or whether eyes blink open on planets. We will never see, but the Cambrian tells us it is possible. Life, once begun, does not stay small. It invents, it experiments, it dares. If it happened here, in our little corner of space, why not elsewhere? The Cambrian is both a memory and a promise that the universe itself may be filled with such sparks, strange and wonderful, fragile yet profound. And so the philosophy of the Cambrian is this: life is fragile, impermanent, sometimes absurd, yet endlessly meaningful. Its experiments may vanish, but their echoes endure. Its triumphs may fade, but their lessons remain. We are not separate from that story. We are its continuation. 500 million years ago, trilobites crawled, Hyperborea blinked, Anomalocaris hunted. Today, we think, we write, we wonder. Different forms, same story. So the next time you gaze at the night sky, imagine trilobites crawling beneath those stars. Imagine Hyperborea peering upward with its 5 eyes, puzzled but persistent. Imagine Earth itself, 500 million years younger, daring to try complexity for the first time. Then smile, because the Cambrian reminds us that even the strangest beginnings can lead to meaning. And if the universe whispers through trilobites, it surely whispers through us as well. That is the philosophical gift of the Cambrian. Not certainty, not permanence, but perspective. The reminder that we are fragile sparks in a vast cosmos, absurd and wondrous all at once. And if we listen, perhaps we can carry its whisper forward, as part of the story it began so long ago. The Cambrian is not just a chapter buried in stone. It has become a symbol, a story retold, not only by scientists in laboratories, but also by artists, filmmakers, writers, and dreamers. Its strange creatures, its alien seas, and its aura of the beginning have spilled out of textbooks and entered the collective imagination. In culture, the Cambrian lives again, not as a dry list of dates and names, but as spectacle, mystery, and myth. Consider the world of science fiction, where storytellers often look backward to imagine forward. Television series like Primeval and Walking with Monsters have brought Cambrian beasts to glowing screens. Anomalocaris, once a fossil puzzle of mismatched parts, was reimagined as a cinematic predator, sweeping through ancient waters like a prehistoric superstar. Trilobites, humble in their quiet abundance, marched again across digital sand, transformed into supporting actors in documentaries that blurred science and story. For audiences, these depictions were more than entertainment. They were glimpses into deep time, windows into a world that feels alien yet real, ancient yet oddly familiar. Popular culture has a peculiar love for the Cambrian. Video games have turned its creatures into enemies to battle or companions to collect. Books have described its seas as dreamscapes of strangeness, playgrounds for the imagination. Artists sketch Hyperborea with its 5 eyes, half in awe, half in amusement, as though even now it is too strange to belong entirely to reality. In this way, the Cambrian has transcended geology. It has become a canvas for creativity, a shorthand for the beginning, for raw experimentation, for life's first grand performance. And in paleontology itself, the Cambrian is more than a period, it is a legend. Fossil deposits like the Burgess Shale and the Meishan Shales are treated with reverence, their slabs handled like sacred manuscripts. Each imprint of a trilobite, each delicate outline of a soft-bodied creature, is not just a data point, but a story, one that scientists tell again and again, in journals, in classrooms, in documentaries. Paleontology has made the Cambrian iconic, transforming its oddities into ambassadors of deep time. If dinosaurs are the charismatic giants of prehistory, then Cambrian creatures are its surreal poets, whispering from the dawn. Culturally, the Cambrian has become a metaphor as well. To speak of a Cambrian explosion in technology, art, or ideas is to invoke the image of sudden creativity, of many forms appearing at once. It is shorthand for innovation, for a burst of possibility. In this way, the Cambrian lives not only in fossils or films, but in our very language, a symbol of beginnings, of invention, of the power of change. And now, as we close this long journey through Cambrian seas and Cambrian lands, we turn from the details of geology and biology to reflection. We have wandered through barren continents, warm oceans, strange creatures, volcanic landscapes, and fragile fossils. We have asked what caused the burst of diversity, and we have pondered what it means for Earth and the cosmos. But now, in conclusion, let us gather these threads, not into science but into story. The Cambrian is, at heart, a reminder. It reminds us that life began with experiments, that the strange often becomes the foundation of the familiar. It reminds us that our world has been many worlds, each with its own beauty and oddity. It reminds us that we are temporary but connected, that the trilobites' march and the human step are part of one long path. And it reminds us that imagination is as important as memory, for without imagination the Cambrian would be only numbers, not dreams. So when we see trilobites on a museum shelf, when we watch a Nomalocaris glide across a television screen, when we read of five-eyed opabinia in a book of wonders, we are not simply learning, we are participating. We are adding our voices to the chorus that began 500 million years ago, a chorus of survival, change, and curiosity. The Cambrian does not end in rock. It continues in us, in our fascination, in our stories, in our laughter at its oddities, and our awe at its grandeur. And now, dear listener, as the lights dim and the stars rise, we reach the quiet ending of our journey. You have walked with trilobites, swum beside alien predators, and stood on barren Gondwanan shores. You have peered into fossils like windows, listened to volcanoes rumble, and watched life invent eyes, shells, and complexity. You have felt the fragility, the absurdity, the grandeur of the Cambrian world. But now it is time to let that world drift back into memory, like sediment settling in quiet water. Let Anomalocaris swim back into the shadows. Let trilobites march away into the dark. Let Opabinia blink its five eyes once more and then fade. The Cambrian has told its story, and we have listened. Before we part, I invite you to reflect. What did you feel walking through these ancient seas? Did the strangeness make you laugh? Did the fragility make you pause? Did the grandeur make you feel small, or perhaps connected to something larger? Share your thoughts, if you wish. Leave a comment, a like, a note, for in doing so you join the ongoing story, the modern echo of ancient time. And now, as you close your eyes, let the Cambrian carry you into dreams. Imagine yourself floating in warm, shallow waters, surrounded by creatures that seem drawn from the edge of imagination. Let trilobites scuttle across the sand at your feet. Let jelly-like forms drift above. Let ancient reefs shimmer in filtered light. Drift with them. Drift with time itself until sleep takes you gently. Good night, traveler of deep time. May your dreams be filled with oceans of wonder, with strange creatures and endless horizons. The Cambrian is gone, yet it remains, whispering still, like a lullaby sung by the earth. Sleep well, and remember, the story of life began long before us, but tonight, in imagination, it belongs to you too.